Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, distinguished guests, friends, and enemies of the Chinese Communist Party. ChinaAid and myself are very thrilled to be able to host and gather such a distinguished group in order to highlight its human rights defenders. It is rare for there to be so many people in one place who are united in bringing greater freedom and rule of law to China. Before I offer a blessing to our lunch, I want to propose a moment of silence for a champion for freedom and rule of law and human rights, especially in China. So many of us know him over the years. Is our friend Fred Haidt. It's from the Washington Post, who has been really not only in the media field, but also advancing the human rights and religious freedom and rule of law. And unfortunately, he just passed away, as some of you may have known. And so let's have a moment of silence. Dear gracious God, thank you for being the light, the way, and the truth. Thank you for create not only this world, but also according to your image, create our human being so that we can proclaim the human rights and freedoms. And Lord, we thank you for gathering each one of us at this table today, at this historic moment when China is sinking into the worst time on rule of law, human rights, and religious freedom. Thank you for using each one of us in our different professions, different fields, as we come together to hear some of their stories under the atrocity. We remember those who are bound, who are imprisoned for righteousness' sake, as if we are their fellow prisoners today. May you bless our time together, and may you bless the lunch that we're going to enjoy. May you give them, those prisoners of conscience, the loved ones of some of them who are here. May you give them unspeakable joy, even in the dark cells of the Chinese Communist Party at this moment, wherever they are, from Xinjiang to Heilongjiang, from Hainan Island to Zhejiang province, from Beijing to Chengdu to Kunming. May you let them know they are not forgotten, and their fight for freedom is not in vain. May you give us the courage, the effort, not only from the governmental perspective, but from our individual as a human being, to continue the fight with them to advance religious freedom, human rights, and rule of law for all people, all faiths, and all the time. I pray the blessings of this meal. May you give your blessings to nourish our body and our soul. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you. As some of you may know, this is a special occasion to deliver and remember, actually, one of China's heroine, Miss Lin Zhao. We named after her for this Lin Zhao Freedom Award after we received an anonymous donor who donated the funding 4 years ago to dedicate it to award those in China who are fighting, like Lin Zhao, for freedom and especially freedom of expression and rule of law in China. So first of all, I want to welcome Professor Lin Lianshi from Duke University to give us a little bit background of who Lin Zhao is. And he is also the author of 2 books, at least on the 2 books on the table, and the Lin Zhao's biography, so far the only one called Blood Letters, The Untold Story of Lin Zhao. Let's welcome Professor Lianshi. Professor Lianshi.
Thank you, Bob. Lin Zhao was a poet. She was the most important political dissident of the Mao era. In her adolescent years, before the communists came to power, she attended an American Methodist mission school in her hometown, Suzhou. In 1960, when she was 28, she was arrested as a counter-revolutionary for helping to launch an underground journal, a spark of fire. That journal told the truth about widespread famine during Mao's Great Leap Forward, which claimed at least 36 million lives. In prison, Lin Zhao kept up an open opposition to Mao and to Chinese communism, calling it slavery and totalitarian tyranny. She wrote, "Nobody has the right to tell me, in order to live, you must have chains on your neck and endure the humiliation of slavery." She added, "As long as there are people who are still enslaved, not only are the enslaved not free, those who enslave others are likewise not free." For her sacrilege against Mao's revolution, she was executed in 1968 at the age of 36. She was shot inside Shanghai Municipal Prison. Lin Zhao's prison writings total some 500,000 Chinese characters, almost half of which were written in her own blood. She drew blood from her fingers and wrote with a bamboo strip or a straw stem. She asked in a poem, "Our country belongs to all its peoples. How can its mountains and rivers be turned into an emperor's private grounds? 只因社稷公梨树，哪许山河私地王?" Our goal is to make sure that there will never be another emperor in China, she wrote. I have persisted in wresting my basic human rights from the totalitarian system and from communist demons because I am human. As an independent, free person, I am entitled to my birthright, which is my share of God-given, intact human rights, Lin Zhao declared behind bars. She was a Christian and saw her struggle against totalitarianism as both a political and a spiritual battle. Because of her religious beliefs, she renounced violence, and she prayed for Mao's soul in her prison cell. What Lin Zhao went through in prison bears parallels to the ordeals of persecuted human rights activist in today's China. She was tortured. 2 pairs of handcuffs were put on her arms and her wrists behind her back. The shackles stayed on for 6.5 months. Even when she was writhing in pain from gastritis, from her hunger strike, they stayed on during her menstrual period. When she went on hunger strike, the guards dipped a rubber tube in Lysol and forced it down her nose to force feed her. We wish the history will not repeat itself, but it does in today's China. We know that citizen journalist Zhang's hunger strike has also met with force feeding while she was tied down. Lin Zhao's protest against totalitarianism ended in 1968, but she continues to speak to her fellow Chinese today. It's a prophetic and transcendent voice. Addressing the party leadership, she wrote, "I have come to see more clearly and deeply the many terrifying and shocking evils committed by your demonic political party. I grieved and wept for them. Gentlemen, those who enslave others can never be free." I will conclude with a tribute that human rights activist and legal scholar Xu Zhiyong paid to Lin Zhao. As you know, Xu Zhiyong was again arrested last year and remains in detention today. He wrote, "Lin Zhao offered all of herself for a free China. She was a prophet and a poet with an ecstatic soul, the Prometheus of a free China. Her life and her death bear witness to an ancient people's piety of thirsting for freedom." Thank you.
We wish there won't be another emperor. And that's what Lin Zhao sacrificed herself. I want to invite our Director of Advocacy, Logan Carmichael, to come over to introduce the next segment for the families of prisoners of conscience to present.
Mainly, I came up here to tell y'all, please start eating. Y'all are welcome. It's a little sorrowful, some of the news, and what we'll be talking about today, but please enjoy yourselves. We're here to celebrate and remember as much as we are to acknowledge the work and the courage of these prisoners of conscience. So our next segment, we're honored today to have many family members of current prisoners of conscience in China, even more so today, that aren't listed on the program. And unfortunately, we won't have time to share, but we'll start off this with Li Aijie. They'll come up and they'll introduce themselves.
Yeah, can you come over to help? 还是你要吗？不知道。比如你用中文说是吧？你需要翻译。
大 尊敬的女士们、先生们，大家好，我是张海涛的妻子李爱杰，感谢大家在这里听我诉说我先生所遭受的迫害。
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about my husband, Zhang Haitao. My name is Li Aijie.
我先生张海涛因为思想言论罪被以煽动颠覆国家政权罪，还有境外刺探、非法提供情报罪，判处有期徒刑19年。
My husband, Zhang Haitao, was sentenced to 19 years in prison in Xinjiang for inciting subversion of the state power and for spying for foreign agency.
他在网上发表了69条微信、205条推特，抨击了中国的独裁政权，批评了中国共产党及政府当局。
His main crimes, including posts about 69 on WeChat, 25 on Twitter, criticizing the totalitarian regime of Chinese Communist Party.
最重要的是，他触碰到了中国政府的敏感地带新疆。他长期生活在新疆，亲眼目睹了发生在新疆的人权危机，揭露了中国政府在当地实行的民族压迫政策。他为维吾尔等受迫害民族的人权发声。
His most important offense against Chinese government is that he talked about the most sensitive region, which is well known today, Xinjiang. He lived there. He witnessed the persecution of Uyghurs and the violation of human rights there. And he exposed what the Chinese government was pushing, the very repressing policies in Xinjiang. And he spoke up for those who were persecuted.
他的另一条罪证是，他拍摄了新疆乌鲁木齐街头的13张照片，发到了境外博讯网站上。
So one of the so-called evidence of his crime is that he took 13 photos on Urumqi, the capital city of Xinjiang, and published this at Boxun, the Chinese website.
张海涛长期为权力运动和中国独立候选做义工，参与废除国务院关于劳动将问题的决定的签名活动，因纪念6·4和举牌声援良心犯而遭拘禁、询问，热心协助访民维权等。
Zhang Haitao was a long-term volunteer for the rights campaign and the movement for independent candidates for elections in China. And he was also a strong speaker for the political prisoners in China. And he helped many of the petitioners.
基于以上长期的言行，引起中国当局强烈的不满和仇视，加上他被抓捕之后拒不认罪，中国当局以重判一个说真话的普通人，以达到威吓新疆人乃至整个中国人的目的。
Because of his courageous activities, he was feared and hated by Chinese government. And because he stand firm till today, refusing to admit guilt, Chinese government sentenced him to 19 years in prison simply for speaking up for truth in order to instigate fear to people of Xinjiang and all over China.
张海涛目前关押在距离新疆乌鲁木齐1100公里的塔克拉玛干沙漠腹地的沙亚监狱，期间只被允许3次家属会见。
Now, he is imprisoned in a prison more than 1,000 kilometers away from Urumqi, way in the desert. And he was allowed only 3 times of visit by his family. The last time he was seen was April 26th of 2018. It's almost 4 years ago. And that is because of the hard work of Bob Fu, and because he took us here, Washington, D.C., and get international pressure. As a result, Zhang Haitao's sister was able to visit him.
2018年4月26日是最后一次得以会见，还源于傅西秋牧师带领5号儿子到美国华府寻求国际援助，海涛的姐姐才有机会见到他的弟弟。海涛姐姐说：“我问弟弟几个人一个监视，他说就他一个人。问他能出来活动吗？他说原来有一个门，后来门被封上了。”这也再次证实此前我探视他时，他所遭受的酷刑及虐待。他被单独关押，不让放风。
Haitao's sister asked him how many people in the cell. He said he was jailed alone. When he was asked whether he could move about, he said there was a door, but the door was shut. So that proven. Okay. So that has proven what, when I saw him last time, the torture he experienced. He was in solitary confinement. He was never allowed to go out, and he was handcuffed and shackled all the time. He was beaten continuously. He was deprived of sleep for 20 days. And when he was tired, sleepy, they would burn him with a lighter.
此前他在看守所时，律师带出的消息，他被戴沉重的脚镣，用备用手铐反吊着打，连续20天日夜不让睡觉，不准闭眼。如果困了，就用打火机在他的头前后左右点着烧。3年7个多月，1316天了，新疆当局一直不允许家属会见张海涛。我们不知道张海涛的生死状况如何。
It's 1,316 days since the last visit. We don't know whether he is alive or not, or what kind of torture he is going through. Otherwise, why wouldn't he be allowed to be visited, or whether he was tortured to death even?
我很担忧他在里面遭受了酷刑，要不然为什么这么长的时间不让家属会见，或者已经被残害致死？我的儿子穆田，名字是自由的意思，小名小曼德拉，寓意争权人权的意思，都是他爸爸给起的名字。这个孩子已经6岁了，从出生到现在从未见过他的爸爸，他是多么渴望得到爸爸的拥抱和陪伴啊！可是这么一个简单的愿望，居然成了一个奢望。
This is our son. His name is Mu Tian, which actually means freedom. And his nickname is Mandela, meaning champion for human rights. These are the names given by his father. But he's 6 years old now. He has never seen his father. So he draws this picture.
这次世界人权日之际，我强烈要求中国政府依照中国的法律归还王先生的家属会见权、通信权等。
In the eve of World Human Rights Day, I demand that Chinese government guarantee the rights of visitation of my husband.
张海涛是无罪的，他应该得到自由和释放，而不是等到他63岁白发苍苍刑满释放。不敢想象他遭受这样的酷刑虐待，是否能活着走出监狱。
My husband, Zhang Haitao, is innocent. He should be released immediately. He shouldn't be waiting for when he is 63 years old. It's hard to imagine how he could survive with such torture.
我在这里恳请美国政府、国际社会、国际人权组织帮助我，让家人能会见到张海涛，以证明他还活在中国的监狱里面，并进一步敦促、施加压力给中国政府释放张海涛。
Today, I plead American government and the international organizations and international community to advocate for my husband and help me so that Zhang Haitao would be visited as a proof that he is still alive and eventually for his unconditional release.
长夜漫漫，天总会亮，随时会亮，这是张海涛心中的一句话，也是他的期盼。如果每个人对这种践踏人权的行径保持沉默，那我们每个人都将陷入着黑暗和绝望之中，被黑暗所吞噬。让我们一起对这种践踏人权的行径说不吧。
Now we are in a long, dark night. But hope will overcome. This is what he believed, and that's his prayer now. If we are silenced by this kind of violation of human rights, we all become complicit. So today, let's all together say no to the totalitarian regime of Beijing Communist Party.
我再次恳请各位帮助这对父子能够在有生之年相聚拥抱，让张海涛能够亲眼见到、触摸到他的儿子，让这个从未见过爸爸的孩子能早日得到他本应得到的父爱，让我们一家人早日团聚。非常感谢大家。
I hope that because of our work here today, that one day our family could reunite and Zhang Haitao could embrace me and his son. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I almost cried when I saw Zhang Haitao's son draw so beautiful picture. It's so hard for families like us. I'm Lin Lianshi. I'm the wife of Chen Yuan, and my husband Chen Yuan is the founder of NGO Changsha Funeng. In 2019, in the July 22nd, 2019, my husband and his two colleagues, Uyghur Zhisheng, Liu Dazhi, were arrested by the Chinese government. The accusation is subversion of the state power. So them three were called Changsha 3. And after 2 years, this July, we heard they were secretly sentenced, and my husband was secretly sentenced to 5 years. In the past 10 years, my husband Chen Yuan advocated for the Chinese human rights for the disabled people in China. He called to end the birth control policy to return the birthright to the Chinese people. And he fought for 6 million families who lose their single child. He helped the disabled people's equal rights, and he also advocated greatly for the lawyers' rights whose licenses were revoked by the Chinese government. Then he became the target of the Chinese government. Since he was arrested, the Changsha Three, they encountered the separately detention, first to dismiss their lawyers and use the government-designated lawyers. And the government-designated lawyers never contact us. And their name became secret too. They were secretly tried, secretly sentenced, secretly transferred to jail. And now the indictment document is a secret. So when my husband was arrested the same day, I was put into a black hood, I was handcuffed, and I was also put into living under surveillance for 180 days. The accusation is also subversion of the state power. But my job is an online sales director in a business company. So, and the next day, my bank account was frozen. I have a 3-year-old girl, say there. Her name is Leah Chen. Yeah, now she is 5. Yeah, but by that time, she is 3. And I have a 3-year-old girl, and the Changsha National Security arrested his dad in front of her. And Leah was separated with me because I was brought to accept interrogation over 20 hours. So that night, Leah stayed in my pastor's home, and she had nightmare. Now she is 5. She will turn 6. So in the past 8 and 70 days, I haven't seen my husband. I haven't communicated with them. The lawyers were forbidden to meet them, and my daughter really misses his daddy. Also as a Christian, as a human rights defender's, Chinese human rights defender's wife, and also a Chinese Christian, and I faced double persecution. Last year, my daughter's church school was forced to close by the Shenzhen police. After that, I taught her, I did homeschooling to teach my daughter, use Boycott homeschooling courses. But this year, it's 2 months ago, the Boycott homeschooling agency in China, the Christian brother Wang Yi was also arrested, along with his other teachers and parents. And also my church in Shenzhen was raided by the Chinese government for 3 times. And my pastor and brothers, sisters were detained for almost 12 hours. After that, the worship, the Sunday worship, and the group also were stopped by the police. So this is the situation happening in China. And I really hope today you can hear our voice, and you can also continuously pay attention to the Chinese human rights. And I also hope the international world can give you a strong word and let families like us reunion. Thank you.
Thank you, Minglei. I apologize for this little bit change of order because we're honored to have two distinguished members of Congress, Congresswoman Vikki Hussler and Congressman Chris Smith, because they have a very tight schedule this afternoon. So we moved the order a little bit. Sorry for the other three families of conscience. We will kind of, after Congressmen and women finish them, then we kind of let you come back. It's my distinguished honor to introduce Congresswoman Vikki Hussler, who represents Missouri's 4th Congressional District. And she was elected to the U.S. Congress in 2010 and serves on the House Armed Service and Agricultural Committee and chairs the House Values Action Team. And Representative Hussler is also an advocate tirelessly for those freedom of conscience, the prisoners, including she adopted the jailed Pastor Zhang and has constantly been a strong voice for the persecuted Christians in China. And so let me also introduce Congressman Chris Smith at the same time. Congressman Chris Smith is a true friend of Chinese people and honored to be sanctioned by the Chinese regime, along with Ambassador Brownback, who are also here today. He has served, this is his 21st term in the U.S. Congress, has been a dear friend, and of course campaigned for human rights, religious freedom, rule of law tirelessly. He is currently serves as the co-chair for the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission and ranking member of the bipartisan House, the Congressional Executive China Commission. We are so honored to have both of you, and I would also invite all those prisoner of conscience, their family members, to also come forward. To kind of back their remarks and in solidarity. 所以我们现在请这两位议员先讲话因为他们要去投票。所以我们就他们讲完话之后呢，我们这两位我们要马上颁这个连招自由奖那么我们请这些所有今天来的这些几位良心犯的家属，能够带着你们的这个相片呢，都到台上来，在两位国会议员讲话的时候Okay, let's welcome Congresswoman Hussler, then Congressman Chris Smith.
Thank you so much, Bob. It is such an honor to be here, and I appreciate so much your leadership and all that you and the organization, everybody in this room does for human rights. Certainly honored to be here with my colleague, Chris Smith, and Ambassador Brownback. I had an opportunity several years ago to go to China when I was a state representative, and I had long read about the persecution of Christians in that country beforehand. And while I was there, every chance I got, I would try to ask, what is the status of religious freedom for people here, and are they able to worship freely? And I just have had a heart for my Christian brothers and sisters in China, and I'm just very proud to be able to be here in Washington, D.C., and to fight for religious freedom and human rights for all individuals here. And I thank you for the stories, for those families who've already shared. Wow. And I hope I can stay a little bit longer and hear some more from the other families. So powerful. But make no mistake, and I am on the Armed Services Committee. I hear the classified briefings all the time, that the CCP is committing crimes against humanity, from the mass internment of Uyghurs to the systematic persecution of Christians that we've heard about today, to the silencing of journalists and arbitrary detention of human rights lawyers. There is no limit to what the CCP is willing to do to project total and complete control over its population. People of all faiths are being persecuted simply for their religious beliefs. The CCP believes any religion could threaten regime control over society and is targeting individuals of faith through the sensitization of religion, a process intended to shape religious traditions and doctrine to conform with the objectives of the Chinese Communist Party. Chinese authorities have closed churches, destroyed property, installed video surveillance equipment on church properties, and forced churches to remove crosses and replace them with slogans praising the Communist Party and General Secretary Xi. Those who practice their religion or stand up for to the repressive policies of the CCP face arbitrary arrest, detention, and often torture, as was shared today. I'm proud to be a commissioner on the Congressional Executive Commission on China, and part of our mandate by law is to maintain a database of political prisoners in China. These are individuals who have been detained or imprisoned for exercising their internationally recognized civil and political rights. Unfortunately, the opaque nature of the CCP makes it difficult to know the exact number of political and religious prisoners. And while our database has identified nearly 10,000 individuals by name, we know that there are many more and that the number continues to rise. Our list does not include all the Tibetan or Uyghur detentions, meaning there are literally millions of religious and political prisoners in China. Today, we're here to raise awareness about two individuals who remain detained by the CCP, Zhisheng and Zhang. Their pictures are here. Gao is one of the most respected human rights lawyers in China who's been persecuted for years for his courageous work. Sadly, he forcibly disappeared in 2017. Zhang is a journalist who was sentenced for 4 years in prison for reporting on the COVID-19 outbreak in Wuhan. She is currently being denied proper medical care in prison and is at risk of dying. These are courageous individuals, and they're suffering at the hands of the CCP because they spoke out against the abuses, human rights violations, and cover-ups committed by the Communist Party. Here in the United States, we were founded on the principles of freedom of religion, speech, and press, and we have the responsibility to demand the release of lawyer Gao and Ms. Zhang, as well as the release of all political and religious prisoners in China. Through the Defending Freedoms Project, I'm a congressional advocate for 3 Chinese Christian prisoners, Zhang Xiaoji, Wang Yi, and Zhan Sao. Pastor Wang Xiaoji was detained on November 16, 2013, after a series of land disputes with local authorities. Zhang and more than 20 members of his congregation were charged with gathering a crowd to dispute the public order. On July 4, 2014, Zhang was sentenced to 12 years in prison. And so think about it, he's been there 7 years now. Pastor Wang Yi led the Early Rain Covenant Church. Wang's congregation, one of the most prominent unregistered churches in the country, was shut down during a series of government raids on church gatherings in December of 2018. Wang was sentenced to 9 years in prison for inciting to subvert state power and illegal business operations. Pastor Zhan Sao is a holder of a permanent resident card from the United States, and he has been focused on humanitarian work in Burma. Mr. Sao regularly traveled between China and Burma, but was arrested in 2017 and sentenced a year later to 7 years in imprisonment for allegedly organizing illegal border crossings. And although many people reportedly crossed the border without proper visas, only Sao and his colleague, who is also a Christian, were detained. And in September 2019, the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention concluded that the arrest of Zhan Sao violated the freedom from discrimination based on religion under Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The CCP has ignored this distinction. ChinaAid recently published a compilation of Pastor Sao's poems called Living Lyrics, Poems from Prison, and I believe there's copies out front. His resilience is truly inspirational. And I'd like to read a segment from his poem, From Over the Mighty Water. He says, "You can take away my freedom, but you can't take my prayers. My prayers have wings and leap over the towering iron mesh wall. Many brothers and sisters have heard them. They fly freely every day and reach heaven on the blue sky. You can impose heavy punishments on me, but you cannot hold my spirit and my soul. Like cheerful yellowbirds, they raise gentle praises over the iron gate. My Savior must have heard my voice." Thank you again, Bob, for organizing this special event today and allowing me to be here.
Thank you, Bob, a moment ago for that very kind introduction. My name is Chris Smith, and Vikki Hussler, what a tremendous member of the House of Representatives and a leader on human rights. Thank you for your leadership. It's extraordinary. You know, I look over at Ambassador Sam Brownback, who was a governor, a senator, a member of the House of Representatives. He can't keep a job, but just always moving up. And then as Ambassador at Large for Religious Freedom, was the beacon, was the walk point, and we followed and listened to his tremendous words and inspiration. So, Sam, I want to thank you. You have, those meetings that were held, those summits every year with the Secretary of State, and you were absolutely the core of that. It has made a difference, and I thank you for that leadership. It is extraordinary. Frank Wolf, I guess, couldn't be here. I thought he was going to try, but Frank is obviously the original and the sponsor of the International Religious Freedom Act, the landmark legislation that has made all the difference in the world. It created the commission. It created the ambassador at large, Sam's previous posting, and it just has made religious freedom front and center for our diplomatic initiatives all over the world. And then there's Bob Fu, Pastor Bob Fu, who is a force, a man who, has not only looks at the macro and the big picture, but has been so eloquent and effective in helping on the individual level for all those left behind who are struggling so terribly in the Laogai, in the Chinese concentration camps, suffering torture each and every day. Bob Fu is absolutely tenacious in, one, giving us accurate, actionable information every time. When he tells you something, you can take it to the bank, that it's accurate, and then to promote and try to do the best we can to provide freedom and liberty and to lessen the egregious abuse that is being suffered by Chinese human rights dissidents. So, Bob, thank you. You are a force. And then I look over at Chen Guangchong and his wife, Wei Jing. It was Bob who made me aware of Chen's work. We had 4 hearings on Chen Guangchong, including twice when he testified from Beijing, twice from his hospital room, when he said he wanted to come to the United States. Here's a man and his wife who suffered, and family, so horribly because he took on the cause of human rights, but paid specific attention to those women who are suffering from the horrific forced abortion policy, the one-child per couple policy in China in Lingyi, when he defended them. And that earned him and his wife just such cruelty at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. Chen is a hero. We use the word hero a lot, particularly in Washington. Chen's a hero. The people who are suffering in the Laogai or in the Chinese prison camps are heroes, and their families who have suffered so much and put up with so much, and I can't thank you enough for what they go through. It was Pastor Bob Fu who first introduced me to Zhang Hu. Thank you for your leadership. The wife of human rights lawyer Gao Zhisheng. Gao, as we all know, has suffered unspeakable torture and gross mistreatment at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. Zhang Hu testified twice at hearings that I chaired, in 2012 and again in 2014. And she talked about the horrific ordeal that he was suffering. Began in 2005, as she said, because he defended Christians and Falun Gong practitioners and other persecuted groups. She said, and I quote, in September of 2007, Gao Zhisheng wrote an open letter to the U.S. Congress in which he exposed the human rights abuses of the Chinese Communist Party. Because of this, she went on, the Chinese Party put a black hood on him and kidnapped him. They took him to a room where they stripped him naked and brutally beat him. They also used electric batons to attack him all over his body and his genitals so that his body shook violently and his skin turned black all over. And she went on to further detail such horrific abuse at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. At another hearing, we heard from Gao's daughter, Grace. That was in 2013. I called it the Five Daughters hearings because 5 daughters came in before Congress and appealed to Congress and to the White House to take up the cause of their dads. Through her tears, Gao's daughter, Grace, also said she wanted to meet with President Obama. All 5 of the young daughters said they wanted to do so. I have to tell you, I tried for a full year, calling down to the White House frequently, making a pain of myself to say, please just meet with these daughters. They have said to me, and they said it at the hearing, that Barack Obama has 2 daughters. As a father of daughters, he'll understand. And then when he talks to Hu Jintao, he can talk as a dad. We could never get that meeting. And that underscores part of the problem in Washington, where lip service is paid to human rights, but not enough follow-up is done in order to pursue it, unlike Sam Brownback, who did an unbelievable job. Yesterday, as we all know, the Biden administration announced a diplomatic boycott of the 2022 Winter Olympic Games. Rather than, which is a step, but rather than applauding this, I think we should recognize it for what it is. It is weak. This is a genocide that is going on right now in real time against the Muslims, the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, and we need to speak out so much stronger. Going back to 2018, Senator Mark Rubio and I wrote the International Olympic Committee and said, move it, find a different venue where peace and democracy flourish. And our questions and our appeals went totally unheeded. We held hearings on it. Sophie Richardson was at our hearing just a few months ago in the spring, in which we made, and I chaired it, it was the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, a strong appeal for direct action. You know, when the IOC awarded it to Beijing, Kazakhstan got only 4 votes less than China. There could have been a much more concerted effort made to move the Olympics to a venue where freedom and democracy are flourishing. And let's not forget, in 2014, when Xi Jinping was appealing through his government, the Communist Party, to the IOC to have it housed there, hosted there, that's when he was planning his horrific genocide against the Uyghurs. And we all know from the leaked documents that he said, destroy, root and branch, show no mercy. Now this guy is going to be feting the Olympic Games in a matter of months, weeks, the juxtaposition of that with this cruelty is unimaginable. And again, the cruelty that goes on each and every day behind closed doors, when these wonderful, strong and heroic Chinese men and women are promoting human rights and democracy and religious freedom, as they're being beaten. He'll be out there with all the cameras rolling, with all the Coca-Colas of this world. We had a hearing where I asked Coca-Cola to condemn this abuse, and they wouldn't do it with the Uyghurs. It's just unconscionable. So I ask you all to continue your prayers. I do believe that prayer and fasting and hard work and smart work can release prisoners. You know, Chen was thought to be an impossibility. And then through the great work, and again, I want to thank Bob Fu for that. I'll never forget when we had Chen on the testifying, Bob came up to the dais, held up the phone so that you could hear Chen Guangchong speaking, asking and appealing, and the rest is history. Every newspaper carried it above the fold in the Wall Street Journal, and within a day, they said, he can go, let him out of here. Of course, human rights and religious freedom advocates want to stay in China. They want a free and pro-democratic China, and that is the goal. And someday, I truly believe that future generations of Chinese and everyone else in the world will look back on these brave individuals and say, that's why we're free in China, because of the sacrifices that they made. So thank you, and God bless you all.
Thank you. We are so thankful, Congressman Smith, and I would invite Congresswoman Hussler back, and 所有这些良心犯的家属都到台前来因为我们对都上来，因为我们在议员走之前呢，他们希望有一个跟你们一起的相片。Yeah. So member of those the families of prisoner of conscience, please come forward. And those we're going to do the deliver the Lin Zhao Freedom Award now for the 2020 and 2021 award. Our selected selection committee of the Lin Zhao Award consists of 5 judges. 2 of them are from ChinaAid, 3 of them from other different institutions, including Dr. Sophia Richardson and Professor Andrew Wardren and Zubia. Can we do the award delivery first? And Ambassador Brownback, you're the next, but we're going to do the award. Can you also come up because before Congressman Chris will leave? So, 那个 I also recognize some of the the most prominent members of the Tiananmen Square students leaders, including Dr. Wang Dan and Wu Kaixi, who is the chairman of the Taiwan Parliament Human Rights Coalition, and of course Mr. Zhou Fengsuo. They're also here. If you want to also come up to back up this effort, and you're really welcome. 所以你们也可以上来。So basically, so we as a committee voted unanimously for the Lin Zhao Award to goes for 2020 to lawyer Gao Zhisheng, and the 2021 goes to the Zhang for their brief and bold voice for freedoms. And so we are going to have Gao Zhisheng's wife, Ms. Gong He, to represent her husband, and also to have Ms. Cao Yaxue, who is the founder and president of China Change, to represent Zhang to accept this award. By the way, as a life member of CFR, they do have requirement on the face mask mandate, but we are told when you're eating, no mask is needed. Okay, don't be too scared. So, Gong He, where are you? Yeah. Yeah, Sam, can you come also here? And Ms. Tao Yaxue. Yaxue. Oh, you're here. Okay. Represent Zhang. Okay. And I want to call Ms. Gong He to give a few remarks, and then Yaxue Tao can, yeah. 他不需要，他有一个 translator， 对对。对，该你了，对，你就做这个。
大家好，感谢主办单位敦华援助协会和评奖委员会在这里举办林昭自由颁奖的典礼。此时呢，正值12月10号，国际人权日即将到来，更感谢大家对中国人权事业的关注及对高志胜本人的支持。
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, ChinaAid Association and the award committee for hosting the Lin Zhao Freedom Award ceremony. Today marks the approach of International Human Rights Day, which falls on December 10th. Many thanks to everyone's continuous concern and support for my husband, Gao Zhisheng, and the progress of China's human rights.
很抱歉他不能来这里享受这一殊荣，甚至他都不知道他自己已经获得了这个殊荣。因为我们家人不知道他在哪里，已经4年零3个月了。林昭自由奖的颁奖主办单位对高志胜的这份嘉奖有着重要的现实意义，这是对当代中共暴政之下不屈不挠的坚持为社会正义的勇士的鼓励和褒奖，也是同时对我们家人的极大安慰。在此，我深表感谢。
I apologize that he cannot be here to enjoy this honor and regret that he doesn't even know that he himself has received this special honor because our family doesn't know the whereabouts of Gao Zhisheng for 4 years and 3 months now.
高志胜虽然是中华人民共和国合法的公民，但这次呢，他没有收到中共政府对他任何的指控，家里人呢也没有收到任何公安机关出具的任何拘押拘捕的通知。但就是这样生死不明、杳无音信，在一个高度集权的独裁国家，在一个装有世界上最多的摄像镜头的国家，作为中共层层看管的人，我先生居然就这样在人间消失了4年零3个月。
Gao Zhisheng is recognized as a legal citizen of the People's Republic of China, but this time he was not charged officially by the Chinese government, and my family did not receive any notice of arrest or detainment from any law enforcement. He was, however, forcibly disappeared for 1,577 days. To date, his fate is unknown and there are no information on his current conditions. In a totalitarian country, one with the most surveillance cameras, and as someone who is monitored by the CCP higher-ups, my husband just vanished into thin air for 4 years and 3 months.
高志胜律师从2005年开始为代理基督徒、代理陕北油田案和法轮功修炼者案子， 2004年、05年，他3次发出给中共高层的公开信，要求停止对法轮功修炼者的迫害。
Since 2005, lawyer Gao Zhisheng has represented cases of Christian rights protections, the Northern Shanxi oilfield case, and Falun Gong practitioners. From 2004 to 2005, he has sent 3 open letters to the paramount leader of China requesting an end to the persecution of Falun Gong practitioners.
在2006年8月15号，高志胜被警方绑架。同年的12月22号，以煽动颠覆国家安全罪判刑3年，缓刑5年，剥夺政治权利1年。在缓刑期间呢，他多次的绑架、失踪和酷刑。高志胜在5年的缓刑期满，那次的失踪最长达21个月，于2011年底被送往新疆沙雅监狱服刑3年，直到2014年8月17号才刑满释放。
On August 15, 2006, the police adopted Gao Zhisheng. On December 22nd, the same year, on the charge of inciting subversion of state power, Gao was sentenced to 3 years in prison and deprived of political rights for a year. At the time, he was already missing for 21 months. At the end of 2011, he was sent to Shaya, Xinjiang prison to serve his 3 years sentence, and was there until he fully served his sentence on August 7, 2014.
高志胜长期受到了单独的关押、各种虐待和骇人听闻的酷刑，满口牙，几乎所剩无几。出狱的时候呢，是架着出的监狱。家人在这3年期间只获准了2次探视。高志胜出狱后一直被软禁在陕北的小山村，在几乎牙摧残的所剩无几的情况下，仍不允许他看牙医进就诊。在被限制人身自由的情况下，他仍然为中国人权受迫害案撰写了大量的文章，及出版了2本专著，其中为709群体写过多篇的文章，比如写在709事件的2周年之际，全人类正义力量合力促中国释放王全章，黎明前黑暗的人权困境。
Gao Zhisheng was subjected to prolonged solitary confinement, various forms of abuse, and appalling torture. His family was only approved twice for visitation during those 3 years. He was close to being carried out of the prison because he couldn't walk properly when he was first released. After he was released, he had been under house arrest in his older brother's cave home in a remote village in northern Shanxi. Even though a majority of his teeth were destroyed, with only a few of them intact, he was still prohibited from visiting any nearby hospitals for dental treatment or for any medical care.
郭飞雄愿望背后的地狱图景，以及2016年的人权报告等等，他的2本专著2017年起来中国和中华联邦共和国宪法草案跟限制思想。
Under the circumstances of restricted freedom, Gao still penned many articles for those whose human rights have been violated, and also published 2 monographs, among which there are several articles written, such as The Possible Fate of Lawyer Wang Zhang, the 2nd anniversary of the 709 crackdown, and the righteous forces of all mankind, come together to urge China to release Wang Zhang and other 709 human rights warriors.
高志胜每次强制失踪，中共当局他都习惯性的不给家人任何的消息，甚至声称不知道。正如大家所知，最后事实证明人就在他们的手里。中共政府的目的就是迫使他晋升，因为他们惧怕高志胜为社会正义发出的声音，他们更惧怕高志胜为民主事业写下的文字。
Every time Gao Zhisheng was forcibly disappeared, the Chinese Communist Party authorities not only refused to give any information to his family members or even claim that did not note the matter. As everyone knows, the facts were proven that he is indeed in their hands. The purpose of the Chinese government is actually to force him to be silent because they're afraid of Gao Zhisheng's voice for social justice. And they're even more fearful of Gao Zhisheng's written words for the cause of democracy in China.
今天我在这里大声疾呼，虽然高志胜被失踪、被晋升，这恰恰证明了中共的虚弱。我们相信中共当局继续维护独权专制统治，那么像王炳章、邵仲国、高志胜等这些勇士们的反抗精神就永远不会的消失。
Today, I'm here to loudly speak out. Although Gao Zhisheng is missing and silent, it indicates the weakness of the CCP. I believe that as long as the Chinese authorities continue to maintain their dictatorship, there will be warriors like Wang Bingzhao, Shao Zhonggao, and Gao Zhisheng, and their spirit of resisting the authoritarian regime of the CCP will never disappear.
10几年来，高志胜总是不放过任何机会为受迫害人发声，并以他的亲身经历讲述着中国人权的现状。他希望越来越多的人能认识到建立民主宪政社会的重要性，并且呼吁更多的人加入到反抗中共专制、争取人权的行列中，这符合每个人及其子孙后代的福祉。
For more than 10 years, Gao Zhisheng has always grabbed onto any opportunity to speak up for the persecuted and use his personal experience to tell the harsh human rights situation in China. He hopes that more and more people will realize the importance of establishing a democratic constitutional society and calls on to more people to join the ranks of resisting the CCP's dictatorship and the fight for human rights. This is for the well-being of every single person and their descendants.
争取人权自由是人之本性，生生不息，代代不止。不自由，勿宁死。这便是高知生们在困境中仍然不屈不挠地坚持的伟大价值的所在。这也是国际社会力量坚定地支持中国人民争取自由的民主价值所在。
Fighting for human rights and freedom is the nature of human beings. It is everlasting, prosperous, and goes on for generations. Give me liberty or give me death. This is the great reason by which Gao Zhisheng has held on to in difficult fights, and it is also the reason international justice continue to firmly support the Chinese people in their struggle for freedom and democracy.
非常感谢在位的嘉宾一如既往的支持高志胜，寻找高志胜。我想呢，希望就是说通过国际社会力量吧，能给中共施加压力，让交出高志胜到底在哪里，让高志胜回家，让他自由。
Thank you to all the distinguished guests that are present today, and thank you for your continuous support for Gao Zhisheng. And I ask that as an international community, we should apply pressure on the Chinese government so that we can bring back Gao Zhisheng and that we can know his whereabouts. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Enjoying your lunch, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank ChinaAid for recognizing Zhang and for allowing me to say a few words in her absence. It is an honor, and it's also deeply saddening that Zhang is dying in prison as we speak. On February 1st, 2020, Zhang boarded a high-speed train from Shanghai to Chongqing. She got off partway in Wuhan, the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak. She was the only passenger getting off the train that night. During her 14 weeks in Wuhan, she hopped from one lodging to another, around the city wherever she could find a bed. She subsisted on ramen noodles. In the 122 video clips she posted on YouTube, she spoke to shopkeepers, sanitary workers, and the migrant workers, among many others. She rode a bike all the way to the infamous Wuhan lab on a rainy day. It was locked and deserted. The off-white building of the lab where the gain-of-function research had supposedly been conducted was shrouded in the haze in the distance. She visited a cremation facility one night. Standing on the sidewalk, she recorded the eerie blue light on the walls and the figures in full protective gear going in and out of the building. She visited a cemetery where she learned from a woman selling incense and paper money that families who came to bury their loved ones were kept under strict watch of uniformed and plainclothes police. They were not allowed to make noise, nor allowed to whisper to each other as they buried the deceased. Zhang went on to detention centers looking for the whereabouts of Fang Bing, another citizen journalist who was detained in February. When she asked the security guard questions outside the residential compound, she received a death threat. "I'll beat you to death," the guard said to her. Sometimes she roamed the empty streets of Wuhan, speaking into her camera. She criticized the tyrannical lockdown and the mandatory health pass, characterizing the relation between the people and the government as a, quote, cover-up on one hand and the use of force on the other, end quote. Her experience in Wuhan only solidified her beliefs in free speech and transparency. The rest of the story we already know. She was arrested in May 2020 and sentenced to 4 years in prison last December. She has been on hunger strike since June 2020. She has lost half of her body weight, was tied to bed and force-fed. According to the latest report from about a month ago, she could not walk without two people popping her up. She is dying behind the bars in Shanghai Women's Prison. I believe, just coincidentally, it's the same prison that Lin Zhao was imprisoned several decades ago. I confess, I don't understand Zhang. I don't understand her resolve with which she has protested the unjust persecution against her and what she stands for. For most of us, to live free or die seem to have become a slogan. But for Zhang, clearly, it's a practice. However, the point is not whether you and I understand Zhang or not. The point is to ask ourselves this question. If the rest of us had 1/10 of Zhang's strength and determination to stand up to the totalitarian regime in China, what difference would have been made? What a different place would we be today? Finally, I want to make an appeal to President Biden. Please speak to Xi Jinping and demand that China release Zhang immediately. Now, I do wonder, is it too much to ask for the President of the United States to appeal to China for Zhang's life and her cause? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yaxue and Gong He. Well, I think your voice is being heard and will be heard. Our next speaker, I have to apologize to Ambassador Brownback because of the time delays. And we move up for acting principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, Scott Busby. A very good friend of mine, and also a champion for freedom for many decades. Scott has been working at the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor at the State Department, and oversees the Bureau's work on East Asia and the Pacific and the Western Hemisphere, business and human rights-based sanctions. 我们一起来欢迎助理国务次卿这个 Scott Busby. Let's welcome Scott.
Thank you very much, Bob and ChinaAid. I just wish you could find a better picture of me to have projected it. No, Bob, it's a true honor to be here, not only with you, not only with Ambassador Brownback, Congresswoman Hussler, and Congressman Smith, with whom we work closely on these issues, but to be with the family members of the human rights activists on the ground who are truly trying to make a difference in China. It's very, very inspiring to be here with you. Your sacrifices and the sacrifices of your loved ones will not be in vain. We will do our best to work with them and to work with you to improve the human rights situation in China. I'm very grateful, Bob, to participate in this event honoring specifically citizen journalist Zhang and lawyer Zhisheng with the Lin Zhao Freedom Award. The PRC government for years has relentlessly harassed and threatened human rights defenders and activists of all ethnicities, nationalities, and religious backgrounds at home and abroad, and continues to do so. The United States remains deeply concerned by the broad restrictions on human rights across the PRC that result in the targeting of lawyers, journalists, activists, and members of religious and ethnic minority groups, including Uyghurs and Tibetans, as we will hear on the first panel. The Biden-Harris administration has made its views clear about China's human rights situation. Beijing continues to commit genocide and crimes against humanity in Xinjiang and other human rights abuses. As White House spokesperson Jen Psaki noted yesterday, the president made his decision not to send diplomatic representation to the Olympic Games in Beijing because of human rights concerns. The United States strongly condemns the PRC's unjust imprisonment of citizen journalist Zhang and the disappearance of lawyer Zhisheng. We call on the PRC government to release them immediately and cease its efforts to target journalists and lawyers and silence those who seek to report the truth and defend human rights and fundamental freedoms. The United States remains concerned about the deteriorating health of PRC citizen Zhang and asks the PRC to provide her the best health care possible. The United States, along with other governments, has repeatedly expressed our serious concerns about the unjust nature of her detention and her mistreatment during her imprisonment. We reiterate our call to the PRC for her immediate release and for Beijing to provide information on the whereabouts and health of Zhisheng. Unfortunately, the PRC's action in these cases is consistent with the PRC's broad crackdown again against human rights activists. We continue to see harassment and intimidation of PRC nationals and other activists advocating for human rights throughout the PRC. We are committed to using all available tools to promote accountability for perpetrators of human rights violations and abuses, including financial sanctions and visa restrictions. And we seek to do so in coordination with other like-minded partners. In that regard, I would note, for the first time earlier this year, we imposed, in conjunction with the European Union, the United Kingdom, and Canada, all on the same day, sanctions on individuals implicated in the serious abuses in Xinjiang. An additional priority in our human rights approach has been to focus attention on the growing practice of transnational repression used by the PRC and other authoritarian governments. Such repression includes detaining or threatening activists, family members within the PRC, physical and online harassment of activists, and misuse of international law enforcement systems, including Interpol. The United States is committed to using all available tools, where appropriate, to combat transnational repression and to help support those brave enough to speak out against serious human rights abuses and atrocities without fear of retribution. Thank you again, Bob and ChinaAid, for the opportunity to speak at this event. We appreciate the attention you are bringing to the cases of these important activists, and will continue to work with you to try and bring them to freedom. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott, for coming over on behalf of the State Department and the Biden administration. I think we have heard lots of the voices already. I think, as we said, from the title, it's called Crisis Demands Action. Now, I think we should have some action part. I want to call Ambassador Brownback and the representative of Congressman Frank Wolf. Unfortunately, Congressman Wolf, due to a scheduling reason, he sent his grandson, Caleb, to come over to read a statement. Then I will invite Ambassador Sam Brownback. So, Caleb, can you come over on behalf of Frank Wolf? Yeah.
Good afternoon. First, I want to say it's an honor to be speaking on behalf of my granddad and with Ambassador Brownback and Chris Smith and all their prisoners of conscience families who have been such champions on this issue. It truly is an honor. As Mr. Fu mentioned today, I'm speaking today on behalf of my grandfather, Frank Wolf, who actually cannot be here today because he is recovering from ankle surgery. And while prayers are appreciated for my grandfather, also keep my grandmother in your prayers, as she has the very daunting task of keeping my granddad, who all of you know very well, who does not like to sit still, stationary in one seat for the next 2 weeks, which will be a miracle and a challenge to say the least. He wishes he could be here today. During my grandfather's 34 years in Congress, he advocated tirelessly on behalf of the persecuted, specifically the persecuted in China. Today, the Chinese Communist Party, with President Xi Jinping at the helm, is out of control. We have witnessed over 140 Buddhist monks in Tibet set themselves aflame in protest of the cultural genocide China is carrying out against them. Today, the organ harvesting business among the Falun Gong practitioners reaches close to $1 billion a year, with customers from all over the world. The Catholic Church is under attack, with bishops and priests being imprisoned and religious activities being outlawed. Christians must meet in underground churches and pray they are not caught with the Bible. Today, Joshua Wong, a young freedom fighter in Hong Kong, sits in prison due to national security law, and the world largely forgets his plight. Today, the most egregious action of the Communist Party is the genocide being carried out against the Uyghur people in Xinjiang. The crisis meets the Raphael Lemkin definition of genocide and international crime breaking the Genocide Convention of 1948. The recent videos leaked from Xinjiang unveil the sheer scope and size of the camps and suggest that there may be many more imprisoned than the 1 to 3 million we typically cite. Unfortunately, the dangerous influence of China does not stop at its borders. Many prominent law and PR groups here in D.C. represent companies controlled by the Chinese government. The Chinese Communist Party is actively providing grants to many of our universities and in return receive hundreds of millions of dollars invested through endowments and large funds back in the Chinese mainland. The question we must ask ourselves as freedom-loving Americans is, when have we had enough? When do we as a nation demand the release of the Uyghurs? When do we universally demand for the release of all the prisoners of conscience listed today? When do we demand our lawmakers finally pass a bill that demands and bans all slave-made products and components from being sold in the United States? When do we finally wake up to the fact that China is an evil regime with a stated goal of being the most powerful nation on earth? Do we wake up when they surpass our economic might, when they take over Taiwan, when they have the greatest and largest military on earth? When peers from my generation are dying on the beaches of Fuzhou and Shanghai, will we wake up then? Bobby Kennedy, in his Day of Affirmation address, calls on the young people of the United States not to fall prey to the victim of futility. He stated that each time a man stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out an injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring those ripples, build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. Folks, when one nation diplomatically boycotts Olympics, as the United States did yesterday, then many will follow. If one major athlete boycotts the 2022 Winter Olympics, many will follow. If one of the 12 major sponsors cancels its sponsorship and cites the genocide, then more companies will follow suit. If one major university divests its assets tied to Uyghur genocide, then more will follow. I am calling on the athletes and companies and universities to be this ripple. You have a place to stand and the opportunity to fight injustice and violence. These ripples of hope will ultimately become the tidal waves of change against the Chinese Communist Party, and it is our duty not only to start the ripples, but to see them carried out. Thank you, and God bless.
Now, let's welcome our good friend to the Human Rights and the Global Religious Freedom Ambassador and former Senator, Governor, and really the honorable sanctioned hero by the Communist Party, Ambassador Zhan Brownback.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob. Appreciate that very much. And ChinaAid, Logan, thank you for what you guys are doing here. Congressman Hussler and Smith have both left, but these are giants and heroes. And then the people that have been persecuted and your family members. I mean, my heart just goes out to you. I took a picture of the young boy up here with the picture of his dad that he had drawn and sent it and posted it and sent it to my family members, and they're just talking about how much this just pulls on them. And what it should. It should. You've got this powerful nation that's persecuting its own people for simply standing for freedom. How ridiculous is that? And I appreciate your statement on behalf of your grandfather. You carry his message well, which is saying a lot, because Frank is an undaunting messenger and just been fabulous. So we talked about recognizing what's taking place. I'm going to ask you for action. We're announcing today, I join with many others today, calling for an advertisers' boycott of the Winter Olympic Games unless China announces a date. They will close the Uyghur concentration camps and release a list of 18 prisoners of conscience that we are presenting. So let me be clear with what we're asking for here. We're asking these Western advertising companies to stand with us for freedom. and say to the Chinese government, announce a day you are closing these concentration camps of the Uyghurs. And if you do, we go ahead and advertise. If you don't, we are pulling our advertising from the Winter Olympics. We need to do this. I think it is absolutely ridiculous that Western companies that treasure human rights would financially support a regime while it conducts a genocide. They're doing a genocide, and we've got Western dollars flowing in to support the regime. This is ridiculous. These companies should use their financial leverage to free people, not to enslave them. I applaud the World Tennis Association for standing up to the Chinese Communist Party. They stood up. Now, one of the Chinese tennis stars is still not really heard from. I mean, at least they're saying she's heard from, but I don't believe what they're posting. But at least the World Tennis Association said, we're pulling our activities and our events from China when this regime operates this way. I call on the NBA to do this. I call on other groups to stand up to the Chinese Communist Party. If the United States or Western government did anything like what the Chinese Communist Party is doing, these groups would be all beside themselves complaining. Why not about China? Why not? Is the money that dear to you? Is it that important to you that you won't do it? Follow what the Tennis Association has done and stand up to the Chinese Communist Party. May the rest of us be as principled as the WTA. I want to read this brief statement. We've got a number of people that have signed on them, and if you haven't, I want to invite you to sign on with it today. We, the undersigned, ask the Olympic sponsors of the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympic Games in China to secure from the Chinese government a firm date by which they will close the concentration camps in the Uyghur region and release the following prisoners of conscience. We've got a list of 18 on this letter. If the Chinese government will not provide a specific date when the camps will be closed and these individuals released, then we call on the Olympic sponsors to withdraw their advertising and sponsorship of these Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics. That's the letter. We're releasing it now. As of today, and the sponsors that are the people that have signed on to it, we invite others to join in this letter and to put pressure on these advertisers. Either get the concentration camps closed or pull the advertising dollars, period. It's time to choose. Well, are you going to stand with freedom or are you going to stand with a regime that's conducting a genocide? Thank you all for being here and your hearts and your prayers. Keep them up. We are going to win this fight. We are going to win this fight. This is a regime that's acting like one that's in decline, being such a bully of the way they're conducting things today. We're going to win this fight. Do not lose heart. God bless you all.
All right, everyone, thanks for bearing with all the speakers, but this next one hardly needs an introduction in the space that everyone works in. Chen Guangchong is a self-taught lawyer who has defended the rights of farmers, people with disabilities, and women subjected to abuse. As a result of his human rights activities, he was imprisoned in 2006 and then held prisoner in his home on his release until 2012, when he escaped house arrest and found sanctuary in the U.S. Embassy in Beijing. Much of his story was told by Congressman Chris Smith earlier today. Currently, he holds a position at the Catholic University of America, where he remains outspoken on human rights issues in China. Chen Guangchong.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm a troublemaker. I think you know that, right? Yeah, I'm fortunate, you know. My brothers still in prison, like Zhisheng, like Xu Zhiyong, Ding Jiaxi, but I'm here. So I'm so glad to be here to talk about human rights, to talk about the Communist Party prosecutions. Talking about human rights and the rule of law in the context of an authoritarian regime is like talking about traffic regulation in the desert. Yeah, that is I'm thinking a lot about this. Yeah. So you can see Zhang simply wanted to understand what was happening in Wuhan. She wanted to see what life was like for the people of Wuhan when their city was closed off. She took some videos. She wrote about what she saw. The Communist Party arrested her and sentenced her to prison. Now, she went on hunger strike. Now her life hangs in the So, you know, I understand a lot about her. I read a lot of videos. She used her life in exchange for the truth. But the truth had still not come out. Unfortunately, democracies have already given up on the search for the origins of pandemic. Terrible. But those who created the coronavirus must be punished. If the Western government ignores that, there will be more viruses will come here after this one. So, attorney, my good friend Gao Zhisheng, helped the people defend their legal rights. So the Communist Party arrested him, tortured him, and put him in prison. Then, only to be kidnapped by the authorities. That was over 4 years. Now, no one knows where he is. No one knows if he is alive or dead. So, not a lot of like this. So we can see the communist regime is the enemy of humanity. There are no human rights and no rule of law in mainland China. In fact, under authoritarianism, there are no rule of law. The Communist Party, the evil CCP, coerces the government, prosecutes the people at home, not just journalists, human rights lawyers, Gao Zhisheng, Zhang, Chen Yuan, and Zhang Baocheng, Ding Jiaxi, Xu Jiyong, a lot of legacy. Not just that, a lot of. If you are awake, if you want to try to get the truth, if you understand how to evolve the Communist Party, then the Communist Party will try to find a way to punish you. So I think we stand here. We can use different way to against the Communist Party. Not the China Party not just persecutes their own people abroad. The CCP upsets global order and security. There is no hope that it will change. We have to face the evil and confront the CCP. We have to join hands together to eliminate it. If we continue let the Communist Party did the evil thing, otherwise the world will never be safe. Thank you, everyone.
Hello? Yes, hi. Okay. Wonderful. So again, thank you, Bob and ChinaAid, for having this wonderfully important event. It's great to be here in solidarity with the family members of those who are imprisoned or disappeared in China. It's just quite an honor. It's an honor to be here as well with my colleagues. So Sophie Richardson, who is the China Director of Human Rights Watch, which I'm sure many of you know her or have seen her or read her writings, and Piero Tosi, who is he works for Representative Chris Smith, who unfortunately I guess had to leave, right? He is the Republican staff director for the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, and he's also counsel to Representative Smith for on foreign policy issues. Anyway, so welcome. And so the topic of our panel is the rule of lawlessness under Xi. I should perhaps. I think we're just going to maybe just jump right in, if that's okay.
Right, that's my understanding.
Right, okay.
Talk a little bit.
Right.
Thank you, and Sophie, it's really great to be. We've known each other for a number of years, and Sophie really is one of the heroes. There's so many heroes here too. Nadine, and Ambassador Brownback, Bob, of course, and then the many families and representatives here. I think when we talk about the topic of rule of lawlessness, just want to make 3 points, because I think it's especially Western people, Americans, don't understand what that means. And the first one is there really is no rule of law, 法治, right? That concept is rule by law, not rule of law, and it often is mistranslated. The second point to make is the role of the Communist Party and how everything is subservient to that, and you cannot have rule of law in such conditions. And the third point, which I think is misunderstood, you know, Mr. Smith's on the China Commission, and we've been talking about the translation of Xi Jinping, his title, and it's often translated as president. He is not a president, okay? That is also a mistranslation. He's not a 总统, right? Okay, and that legitimizes him in a way that is not right, okay? And really, I think when you think about what it is, a better concept for thinking about what is going on is the notion of a mafia, okay? So that's why we have rule of lawlessness in China. You know, to that first point, 法治, you know, we know the influence, we talk about the Chinese Communist Party and the influence that communist ideology has had on that. But it really goes much deeper. And you know, I'm someone who's studied Chinese. My wife is actually from Taiwan, and as Bob knows, her father was from Shandong too. So, but if you look at Chinese history, you know, you have two competing ideologies that had such an effect. And the first one is legalism, 法家, okay? And in contrast to that is Confucianism. There is a direct line, I believe, from 法家, from Qin Shi Huangdi to Xi Jinping. The influence of legalist ideology has had on China, and in its modern day manifestation in China today, is one that is unbroken. And that's why, you know, when people translate 法治 as rule of law, they're mistaken. In 2014, when the plenary session of the Communist Party, you know, talked about what all the American newspapers, all the English language papers translated as rule of law, that's incorrect. It's rule by law. It's the use of law to force people, all these political prisoners and all these testimonies that we've seen here, that is not rule of law. That is the use of law to oppress and suppress human rights. The other thing that we cannot forget, this is a communist government. How many people have bought into the Chinese family? How many companies? Mr. Smith talked about Coca-Cola, Visa. We met with them. You know, we had a hearing where we brought representatives of 5 companies, Visa, Airbnb, Coca-Cola, Procter & Gamble, and it was, I think, Intel. And of them, only one company that would admit that there is genocide in China. The rest would not. Coca-Cola, Airbnb, Visa, and Procter & Gamble would not admit that. This is a communist government, and the dictum, the power flows from the barrel of a rifle, is what is characterized that it's not authority, it's power, and it's the use of power. And then finally, the point of why we have rule of lawlessness is because you have a small coterie of people that have taken a country of 1.1 billion people, more than that. And it really is a rule of what, maybe 100 families? And there it is. You know, we've seen in these so-called anti-corruption drives a ever-shrinking circle as people, as opponents, even within the Chinese Communist Party, are eliminated. It really has become really a criminal enterprise. And again, it's much more akin to a mafia crime family in ways. So anyway, that's why I think we have rule of lawlessness. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to the expert, Sophie.
That's fantastic. Thank you for those thoughts.
Sure.
Sophie, right. So what do you think about this? This topic?
I think a lot of things.
Yeah.
But first, if I can just a couple of quick notes. First of all, Bob, Logan, thank you so much for bringing us all together. I think it's glorious just to all be together, and especially for the purpose of holding up people who have demonstrated such extraordinary courage like Gang He, like Liu Zhang. This room is filled with people who live this every day. And we get up and do our jobs thinking that we are working for you. And so it's nice to be here. I also want to give the prize both for speaking beautifully and connecting facts to Cao Yashui with a fact about Zhang being in the same prison that Lin Zhao would have been held in. Professor Xilian, it was such a delight to meet you at Duke and to see you again here today. I think the history that you've brought forward, for people to better understand in contemporary times speaks to some of the issues that Piero is raising. I want to make sure to also thank Mr. Wolf's grandson. I'm sorry, I've already forgotten your first name, my apologies. The family resemblance is striking. Right. And I don't mean in the physical sense. And our deepest sympathies to your grandmother. I can only imagine. But I think we need to contemplate what we do about this problem. I don't think anybody in this room disagrees that there is a lack of respect for the rule of law inside China. And indeed, what we are watching happen even just in these couple of days to Shu Zhiliang and Ding Jiaxi, two people who truly believe in the idea of what the law means, what it's for, and how it should be put to use to defend people's rights, are going to be prosecuted for that. We all agree that that's a travesty, and the question is how best to protect people like them, to make sure that they can do the work that they believe in, but also what's to be done from the outside. And from our perspective, we're pleased to see governments starting to sign on to diplomatic boycotts, specifically in response to crimes against humanity, against Uyghurs and others. But that's got to be just the first step, right? Because when governments commit human rights crimes, the right response is to investigate those and prosecute people for them. And we cannot let the fact that doing that is difficult, given the way international legal institutions work, given Chinese power within the UN system, to lose sight of that goal. Because why do we talk about the rule of law as if it's, it's nice, it provides transparency, it creates predictability for markets, all these sorts of things. It's also a deterrent, right? We don't go out and break the law because we think we'll get in trouble for it, right? It is the way you keep people from doing bad things. And in my view, every day that goes by when the people who are responsible for everything from crimes against humanity targeting Uyghurs to the prosecution of somebody who was just trying to share information with other people peacefully is a day that emboldens the authorities in Beijing to keep conducting themselves in that way. The other piece of the puzzle I just want people to keep an eye on, it's important to us, may not be to others, I get that, is to watch what the Chinese government is trying to do to weaken international human rights law and human rights institutions. This is a real problem. It's Byzantine. It's a little bit boring sometimes. And it can be hard to track, but I don't want to wake up a decade from now to realize that the Chinese government has effectively gutted the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights or rewritten the Geneva Conventions, and all of the pathologies indicating that that's happening are already there, and that's an important front to push back on too.
Great, thank you, Sophie. Very important points for sure. Wonder if I could ask you, maybe first, Piero, about how might we use the upcoming Democracy Summit and also the upcoming International Human Rights Day to press for change?
Right. Well, no, I think those are good questions. I mean, one thing about the Democracy Summit is the inclusion of Taiwan, the Republic of China, and the exclusion of the People's Republic of China. Right. And that speaks volumes. I know we have Wu Kai-shi here in the audience. I just saw him. There he is. And who, one of the Tiananmen protesters, but also someone who represents the Human Rights Commission in Taiwan, the legislative yuan there. So that I think is very significant, and the contrast between what has evolved in Taiwan. I spoke a little bit a moment ago about legalism and Confucianism, and there is this, I think, broad humanistic strain in the Chinese tradition too, the Confucian one that is benevolent, and that in many ways I think has also given rise to a Chinese type of democracy. Chinese democracy is not just an album by Guns N' Roses. It's something that is it is very real, and we see it in Taiwan. That's the first thing. The second thing, because you mentioned Human Rights Day is coming up, and December 10th. Right. When we talk about China, tries to denigrate the whole concept of human rights, but there is in the Chinese tradition, there is a concept of the natural law, the Tao that's written in the hearts. And over the centuries, we talk about the Confucian martyrs. These were people who spoke truth to power. Zhang is a modern day Confucian martyr, speaking truth to power. Well, not yet. We hope for her and pray for her. But there is this notion that you have in Chinese law that there is a law above the law, the Tao. And if the emperor, whether it be Qin Shi Huangdi or Xi Jinping, acts against that Tao, that law that's written in the heart, that emperor loses legitimacy. You see, and the Chinese Communist Party is very much afraid of that. They're very much afraid of being held to account. They say, oh, well, human rights is a Western concept. It is not. It is very much part of the Chinese tradition. And an emperor who loses the mandate of heaven, who loses the Tianming, right, is illegitimate and does not deserve to rule. Because we know in the Chinese tradition that heaven sees with the eyes of the people and hears with the ear of the people. This is something that is very deeply rooted in the Chinese tradition, this idea of democracy and accountability to the people, because there is a law above whatever the Communist Party says is the quote-unquote law. And it's one that's binding, and it's one by which they'll be judged.
Thank you. I actually wanted to ask Sophie, you made this very important point about China's efforts, the CCP's efforts to subvert international human rights norms, particularly at the UN, as well as sort of trying to rewrite how the mechanisms work, et cetera. And this is a huge problem. It's getting bigger, and we should all kind of keep an eye on this. So in 2022, the Chinese government should be facing 1 or 2 or maybe 3 reviews under their treaty bodies for which they have ratified the convention of CEDAW Convention and the ICESCR and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I wonder if you could maybe talk briefly about, again, what we as the international community might be able to do to hold them to account.
Well, I think first of all, being aware of them. These are rare occasions when Chinese government representatives are, sort of politically, diplomatically obliged to come out into the international spotlight and answer tough questions about their track record on the issues that are under consideration. And it's pretty easy to get lots of different issues raised under these broad treaty body reviews. I think much depends on, and I'm happy to volunteer us to help make these reviews kind of more visible outside of the Geneva context. They can be a little bit hard to follow, but we've also been encouraging governments for a long time, and honestly, there should be a canvassing of the people who are sitting in this room, for inputs on the kinds of issues that are going to come up. I mean, on everything from political participation to inequality to the treatment of individual cases, because governments have the ability in these review processes to ask the government under review questions about their track records. And often, a lot of governments go into these not maybe as well prepared or as armed with really sharp, focused questions as they could. The Chinese government also works very hard to make sure that independent voices can't be part of those reviews. And I think we can help change that too, so that, the voices of people sitting in this room, Zhihar, Wang Dan, tick on down the list. There's huge knowledge in this room about all of the different kinds of issues that are going to come up. And we would like to see governments make more of an effort to solicit the input from activists and from family members when they're shaping their questions for these debates, and then publicize them.
Do you have any ideas on what perhaps the U.S. Congress might be able to do in this regard to help promote civil society voices or the State Department?
Well, sure. I mean, we're, as you mentioned, Chris Smith is the chairman of or co-chairman of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, and I'm the Republican half of that. And I think that's an excellent venue to raise these issues. And again, we've had Sophie, as Mr. Smith mentioned, but people of that caliber and quality. So it is a platform by which we can give voice to civil society, as is the China Commission. I also think right now probably the most important legislative vehicle is the Uyghur Forced Labor and Human Rights Act.
Oh yeah, if you could talk about that a bit, that'd be great.
And that
Yeah, right,
no, really,
yeah.
and it's been. I don't want to be political here, but I think if we've. No, we read, I think, that very important, and if you haven't read it, Josh Rogan's report in the Washington Post yesterday, with all due respect to our friend Scott from the State Department, that Wendy Sherman was actively lobbying against it. And what is very interesting, and I'm going to be bipartisan here, because hats off to Senator Merkley, who spoke on the record on that article for raising the issue. And also, on Friday, there were a number of Uyghur and Kazakh demonstrators. In fact, one of them who had been a witness at one of our hearings there in front of the Cannon building, and they said, Speaker Pelosi and Representative McGovern, who's the author of the Uyghur Forced Labor Human Rights Act, please pass this bill. And Mr. McGovern, who's the co-chair of the Tom Lantos Commission, to his credit, he didn't run away and hide. He went out there and had his photograph taken with them. So I hope that the dam is breaking here, and that there's now enough pressure. And again, to Senator Merkley and Jim McGovern, who are both co-chairs of the China Commission, their hats off to them for that. So let's bring, let's vote on it. And for those that don't know, why is the Uyghur Forced Labor Human Rights Act so important? It has a very important tool in it, and it changes the burden of proof for any exports coming from Xinjiang. You now have to show, you have to demonstrate, by preponderance of the evidence, that it was not produced in forced labor, because so much of what comes there, from hair pieces and wigs, which is, these are women who's are shorn with their hair and worse, to even the red lipstick that is used in so much of the cosmetics that comes from a special pepper there in Xinjiang. It is, infuses our supply chains. And again, the hypocrisy of so many, like the NBA, and hats off to Enes Kanter, freedom, right?
Yes, right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hats off to him for taking a stand and for speaking with such moral clarity and conviction on that, to the people who write his paycheck, to the NBA, and wish that more would be and have that courage.
Right, absolutely. Excellent point. About the Olympics and just sports in general. So it's really encouraging that the U.S. finally has made a public statement that there will be a diplomatic boycott, and yay for Lithuania.
Yay for Lithuania, yes. The mouse that roared.
New Zealand. Right, so it's, things are moving, right? So presumably, more countries hopefully will sort of join the cause. And I think, and Sophie, you've made a really good point that it really should be clearly linked to human rights abuses, and not, I think initially wasn't New Zealand saying sort of, oh, it's because of the COVID, somebody was saying because of the COVID restrictions. But anyway, right? There should be strong statements, based on principle. Why VIPs and diplomats from various countries should not be there, right? Be supporting what's happening in Beijing through the Olympics, which is obviously she's Olympics. So what else? I'm curious if you have any other thoughts. Or you mentioned endless freedom, right? Do you have any sort of ideas about what else we can do in our different roles to push on the Olympics, or to push in terms of the Olympics, but also to support organizations like the WTA, for example. Right.
Yeah, it's certainly been a brain-bending couple of weeks on the Olympics front. Particularly. I had never heard of Peng Shuai until a couple of weeks ago. My apologies. I'm not a tennis follower. Am I surprised that a prominent woman resorted to social media to bring forward allegations of sexual violence, of rape, only to then have her posts and effectively her freedom erased? That's not surprising at all. It's both been positive to see the furore in response to this, and to see bodies like the WTA, again, not a body I think about a lot, take a principled stand and say, we know we're going to lose money, we know we're going to make people mad, but we can't in good conscience have tournaments here anymore. But also to call out, I have to say, the breathtakingly appalling conduct of the IOC. I mean, there's so much wrong there to talk about. I struggle to get past the fact that not once but twice now, Thomas Bach has chosen, and the IOC have chosen, to publicize confirming dinner plans with Peng Shuai in January or February, rather than talking about her allegations that she's been raped by a very powerful retired official. Maybe Mr. Bach does not realize that this is 2021. I don't know how to fix that body. Like, we don't have enough time.
I know, right.
But I think one of the really important things we want to see governments do, that's salient to this group in particular, is not just not send diplomats to Beijing to applaud the opening ceremonies or the closing ceremonies. We have asked governments that are going to go this route to use the occasion and to use International Human Rights Day to reach out to and hold up this community, right? All of the people who have been Olympic and heroic in their quest for human rights in China, right? Don't just, of course they should applaud the athletes, absolutely. But let's applaud all of the people who have, taken enormous hits to their lives, made huge sacrifices, and applaud that, because in the long run, that's what brings the kind of change that one would like to see.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Actually,
I think a diplomatic boycott is weak. And I think there should be a boycott. I think Ambassador Brownback is right. One of our witnesses at the hearing, Samuel Chu, spoke about how Russia, the penalty for doping is suspension, but for genocide, it's no. It's business as usual. Right. So there is that, and I know we all hear about the athletes, but just a couple of we talk about Dennis Cantor and his. But what about Ted Williams? People here know who Ted Williams was. One of the best pure base, the last player to hit 400. Now, he was a Boston Red Sox. I'm a New York Yankee fan, Joe DiMaggio, so it breaks my heart to say this. But Ted Williams, at the height of his career, he stopped and his military went and served in the military in World War II and in Korea. And in Korea, he fought a jet plane, a Sabre, against the MiGs over the skies of Korea and was shot down. You can go Google it on YouTube and see the video of Ted Williams crash landing his plane with fire, flames there. That was the greatest baseball player of his generation. Two wars. Pat Tillman is another example. Those are athletes who've sacrificed.
So I was just saying, so just one more on the Thomas Bach and IOC issue. How do we hold them to account?
Well, I want on that point here too. Right. I want to say that Mr. Smith talked about the letter that he wrote in 2018 and a follow-up letter. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other day we got a response from his staff. It was one of the most obnoxious things. It was horrible. Thomas Bach came, and they did meet with our Democratic colleagues, and we were offered, both Senator Rubio and Mr. Smith were offered the opportunity to meet. These are busy people. We couldn't meet at that time. We laid out substantive reasons based on genocide, and the response that we got was, well, we came here, and it's a pity that you didn't have see fit to hear our side of the story. What an obnoxious response to a senator and a congressman there. So we will not forget that. And it's just so. I've got opinions about the IOC.
Right. No, I'm sorry. Yeah. Please. Yeah.
Just to add to this, certainly I think there's a lot of work to be done and leverage to be had, as Ambassador Brownback was talking about, with respect to the broadcasters, the sponsors. No company should want to be associated with, let alone underwriting these things. And, we did write to all of the top sponsors back in the spring with a very simple and, in some ways, from my perspective, too gentle but legally well-grounded question. What does your human rights due diligence strategy look like for your sponsorship of these games? How are you going to anticipate risks? How would you deal with them if you come up? None of them replied to us until we were about to go public on this, and then we just got sort of non-response responses. The CECC hearing with the sponsors was, there was a lot of schadenfreude, I'm not going to lie. But their answers were absolutely appalling. But I think, in the pushback that we've seen, for example, around the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act from the business community, the role of sponsors, I think there's a lot more work to be done in mobilizing consumer opinion, shareholders, and making heads of companies very uncomfortable, if not legally bound in new and different and creative ways. Nobody should want to buy products made with forced labor. Yeah. Nobody should want to see their IRAs grow as a result of the successful sale of technology that's used for appalling repression. Those are very useful avenues, I think, to pursue.
Great, thanks. I think we are close to time. Maybe one more question. I'm curious if you have, if you can sort of maybe boil things down to maybe one thing, or one change that you think might be absolutely critical, or the most important thing to reverse or mitigate, because we're coming back to the title of rule of lawlessness, right? Coming back to the title of our panel, yeah.
Yeah, so when you're faced with lawlessness, how do you react? And I think, again, drawing from Chinese history, that there's a tradition of sort of non-resistance resistance, sort of that Weiwei principle of when you're meeting with oppression and lawlessness, to sort of cede. And what's very interesting in China right now, you see things like the Tanping movement, the lay down movement, where you just sort of you drop out. You just do that. What's also just the peng shui and the way women are treated. There was an article, I think, in Foreign Policy magazine that talked about Chinese music, how bland it is and how uncreative it is, and that's not quite true. One of the more interesting Chinese singers and artists is Tan Weiwei. You might know her. She has a very powerful voice, and she came out with this album, I think, a year or so ago. 3811 was a Sambai, and it tells the sort of vignettes, these stories of different women and how they've, their treatment in China. And when there is this sort of I think latent, you see it with peng shui and the that can really be a movement. It's not necessarily an active one, but if people, along with this Tanping, this sort of this passive resistance, that's always been a source of kind of gentle strength in Chinese history, and let's see what happens with that. So anyway.
Great, thank you so much. Sophie, one critical thing that needs to happen in order to reverse the law of, the rule of lawlessness?
Oh, that that Chen Guangchong, among others, should be prosecuted.
Yes. Okay. Thank you both.
Game on.
All right.
Perfect. Thank you to the panelists. Next up, we have Nadine Meienza, who is a noted speaker, writer, and policy expert with more than 2 decades of experience as an advocate for working families and a champion for international religious freedom. In May of 2020, she was reappointed by the White House to a second-year term on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, where she is currently serving as its chair. Nadine is also president of Patriot Voices, where she provides her expertise to shape the organization's special emphasis on public policies that support working families. Nadine.
Well, thank you so much, Bob, and Logan, and this whole community. And Logan, you were right. You said this was going to be sad, but also inspiring and encouraging, and it is. It's both. There's just so many tragedies that we can talk about and so many victims of the CCP and the horrible policies, but also this strength that is just to be admired. And of course, being in the presence of so many heroes is really humbling for me. So thank you for this opportunity. As she said, my name is Nadine Meienza, and I'm here as the chair as the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. We are an independent, bipartisan government agency, but our complete focus is on religious freedom. And so we have the mandate to make recommendations to the U.S. government, to the President, Secretary of State, and to Congress. And we have 9 commissioners that are appointed by both the White House and the Republican and Democratic leaders in the House and the Senate. So today happens to actually be also the 26th anniversary of the kidnapping of the Panchen Lama. So clearly the CCP has the Chinese government has quite a history of these type of atrocities. And it's wonderful to be here today to honor the countless Chinese human rights lawyers and other rights defenders who have made tremendous sacrifices, as we've heard, for religious freedom, human rights, and the rule of law. Many of these courageous individuals, as we've heard, have faced disbarment, detention, imprisonment, torture, and forced disappearances for their work. Chief among them, of course, as we've been talking about, citizen journalist Zhan, who has been suffering from her deteriorating health while in prison, and renowned Christian rights lawyer Gao Zhisheng, who has been forcefully disappeared since 2017, and it was just wonderful hearing from his wife. Lawyer Zhisheng has rightly been called the conscience of China and a pioneer of the Chinese rights defense movement. He has received numerous awards and has been nominated 3 times for the Nobel Peace Prize. Despite his rise to prominence, Gao has never forgotten his humble roots. Indeed, his life was fraught with challenges and hardships. Lawyer Gao came from a poor peasant family background and had limited access to education. Through hard work and self-study, he became a licensed lawyer. In fact, he even was recognized as one of the top 10 lawyers in China in 2001. Despite his success, he was determined to devote his legal knowledge and time to helping the weak and needy in Chinese society. His rights defense work included cases involving Chinese house churches and Falun Gong practitioners. Lawyer Gao stood up to the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP regime, and openly called on the CCP to end abuses against the Falun Gong practitioners. The CCP in turn targeted Gao for his religious freedom and human rights advocacy, repeatedly detaining, imprisoning, and torturing him. Years of physical and psychological abuse and mistreatment left him suffering from poor health, and since 2017, his whereabouts have remained unknown, which I could not imagine. Lawyer Gao Zhisheng is a hero who deserves to be honored for his sacrifice for religious freedom and human rights in China. It is important that we do not forget about him, especially during his enforced disappearance. By honoring him, we are also reminded of the fact that the CCP regime has continued to persecute countless religious believers and communities, as well as right activists. We stand with the persecuted and their families. We condemn the CCP for these atrocities and call on the Chinese government to release millions of innocent prisoners of conscience, many whom are included in USERV's freedom of religion or beliefs list. Thank you again for the opportunity to be with you today. Honored.
Thank you, Nadine, for your leadership on international religious freedom on behalf of the USERV. And we are going kind of back to the order. We have three other family members or victims of the Chinese Communist Party's threat, actually even inside the U.S., to share a few moments. I want to call Ms. Sophia Sheng Chunluo, and then artist Chen Weiming, and then lawyer Chen Jiang. So all of you, if you can prepare in this order, and let's welcome the wife of lawyer Ding Jiaxi and Sophia Luo Shengchun. Yeah. Luo Shengchun. Yeah. Shengchun. Yeah.
Hello? Okay. Thanks, Bob and ChinaAid, for me to have this chance to tell you the story about Xu Ziyong and Ding Jiaxi. My name is Sophie Luo. My husband, lawyer Ding Jiaxi, he started to promote the human rights activity 11 years ago, together with Dr. Xu Ziyong. They met together on 2012 and jointly together lead the Chinese New Citizens Movement during 2012 and 2013. Their ideas and activities basically centered on getting Chinese people to take their rights written in the Chinese Constitution seriously, practice them in everyday life, and become real citizens of the country, but not the subjects of the country. But their peaceful and lawful activities brought Xu Ziyong and Ding Jiaxi 4 years and 3.5 years prison, respectively, from 2013 to 2017, on the charge of gathering a crowd to disrupt public order. Over 10 other activists of the New Citizens Movement were sentenced to 6.5 years in different cities in China during that time. And the New Citizens Movement was completely cracked down in 2014. Sorry, I forgot in the beginning I should say my topic here is talking about the crackdown of the citizens movement in China based on the cases of Xu Ziyong and Ding Jiaxi. Okay, after their release from the prison, Xu Ziyong and Ding Jiaxi resumed their activities to continue to promote civil rights. They changed the name of the movement to China Citizen Movement in order to attract more people to this movement. They developed new ideas to get more citizens involved in the public interest project, such as the rights to affordable health care and the protection of property rights. But their mild and legal activism caught the attention of the authorities again after a 2-day private gathering in Xiamen with around 20 lawyers and friends in December 7 to 8, 2019. Ding Jiaxi and Xu Ziyong were detained and held under residential surveillance at a designated location, the notorious RSDL, for 6 and 4 months respectively. They were subject to tortures and ill treatment, including but not limited to long-term sleep deprivation and loud noise harassment, as well as food and limited food and water, and tightly interrogated while tightly bound into a tiger chair. No exposure to sunlight, no shower for all the times. Ding Jiaxi said all the 6 months is torture every day, basically, without enough sleep and enough food. All the other Xiamen gathering participants were either summoned, detained, threatened, or sent to RSDL also and tortured before being released. All the released persons were coerced to testify against Ding Jiaxi and Xu Ziyong. After the RSDL, both men were formally arrested on suspicion of inciting subversion of state power and transferred to a remote detention center where they continue to suffer physical and mental abuses, including starvation, poor sanitation, no access to hot water, paper, pencil, books, and newspapers. This August, both men were indicted and charged with subversion of state power, a more serious crime. And the citizens movement, New Citizens and China Citizens Movement, are labeled as illegal organizations. All the articles Xu Ziyong written, the Beautiful China, Beautiful Political, were as a criminal evidence. And an unfinished documentary about the citizen movement and a website related with the citizen movement and the seminars on nonviolent protest, also the citizens' gatherings, all these kind of activities belong to the rights of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly in the Constitution, are all labeled as criminal evidence for these two persons. The purpose is to put them into long-term prison. In any way, Ding Jiaxi and Xu Ziyong definitely have committed no crime because all the rights they advocate the citizens to practice are all according to the Chinese Constitution. China wants to lock these two men up in order to stamp out the growth of civil society they are advocate for. So I ask for your support to put pressure on China to free these two civil rights leaders in China. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, ChinaAid and Bob for giving me this opportunity to come here and say some things. I'm the artist from China, and now I'm in the Los Angeles. I make a sculpture park for Chinese and international human rights, freedom, and democracy. Just a couple months ago, I have a statue. It's called CCP Wallace. It's destroyed by the Chinese government. And we also, why we now in the in the China and the world, in the here is everybody with the mask. This is China make trouble. The virus 19, COVID-19, we are the CCP virus. My sculpture is here, it's CCP virus. We established in the June 4th. Tiananmen Square, remember 32 years. But after around 1 month, some days, it's July 23rd, it destroyed by the burn. They fire this sculpture in the daytime. The first time they want to tear down this sculpture, they use the steel wire, its chain is want to take off, but too stronger. They cut off a piece and the statue, the material, the research, which material, okay. Then it's later on, a week, because first damage is we have some people security over there to protect the sculpture in the night time. So they look the park, have people look after the statue, so they know way in the night time to make damage. So they are in the daytime around the 6 o'clock as they burn the statue. This is our neighbor from park. They take the photo and the video. So this is not just when they tear down, damage and destroy. This is a piece of art. This is in the American soil and American free land. They are fighting with freedom. So like Zhang and another people in the China, they want to speech or research about COVID-19, where it's come from. They lost the Wuhan. I'm the artist. I'm lucky. I'm in the free USA, so I can do this artwork. But you know, so you can see the statue that happened is Chinese government how to infiltration in the American. So I think my art piece destroy, but my art, this is the real truth. This is happening, the COVID-19 CCP virus from China, Wuhan. They want to say this from American soldier. This is wrong. So the history should be right. So I should make another one, the steel one, and next year is still standing in 15 highway, show everyone. So I think my art is destroyed, but I want American people and the world people wake up, not just us. And wake up, we together, we are fighting with China regime and the dictator. Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you, artist Wei Ming. We are in solidarity and fighting with you. As you can tell, you know, the CCP's influence, the maligned influence, has not only been impacting the citizens inside the territory to the Chinese, Han Chinese, to the Uyghurs, to Kazakhs, and to the different people of faiths or non-faiths. And now they have extended their arm really beyond its borders. And today we also have, I want to recognize actually, have a few friends from Hong Kong, the freedom fighters, Elmer Yuan, and he's also here, and also the former Hong Kong legislator Bigo Liang Songhong is also here with us. And so I want to invite Mr. Chen Guangchong for a few words. And can you come or, yes, a few words. Yeah, let's welcome Chen Guangchong.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chen Guangchong. 2 years ago, I still was a human rights lawyer. I work in China. My law firm in Beijing. In 2009, I represented my first human rights case is to protect a house for my client, their house from the government. In 2019, I represent the last case is to help American citizen. The Chinese government controlled this American. And China government didn't allow me to help this woman. The official asked me to quit this case. I replied, I will never. So the government said, you will be disappeared. So in 2019, ChinaAid and China Change, Bob Fu and Yaxue helped us, I and my wife, my children, get out of China. I think the situation, the living situation of human rights lawyers, behind this situation is the human situation and the judicial situation in China. What I said is the experience, the personal experience of myself and my lawyer friends. It's very difficult or even dangerous work as a human rights lawyer in China because the government can destroy our works and our family, our life. The CCP has imposed various obstacles on lawyers' handling of cases, such as refusing lawyers to meet the defendants without any justifications, denying them access to their papers, denying them permission to speak in court, and even preventing them from entering court sessions. There are also direct beatings of lawyers, illegal seizure of lawyers' equipment for handling cases, and even illegal detention, torture, formation of charge, and even imprisonment. The cases are numerous, and I have been a victim myself. The CCP can destroy everything about a lawyer and his family in order to force them to obey, leaving them in immediate trouble. This often involves forcing lawyers to move, cut off the water, power, gas, and internet of the lawyer's house, and cut off the telephone of the lawyers and his family member, threatening all lawyers' family members, banning their children from school, and so on. I and many other human rights lawyers have experienced this firsthand. It's a painful experience. We can imagine how we can live when we move more than 5 times a year. Our children are not allowed to go to school. The electricity and water in our homes are cut off, and the locks are often glued and can't be opened. Among human rights lawyers in China, a large number of lawyers were eventually deprived their licenses by the CCP government in various names. I myself and a large number of friends, they are all well-known human rights lawyers and human rights defenders, were deprived of their licenses, and a number of law firms were dissolved. In the past 7 years or so, dozens of well-known human rights lawyers have been deprived of their licenses. They lost the opportunity to continue working. 7 days later, lawyer Liang Xiaojun in Beijing will be deprived his license. He is the newest one. Dozens of Chinese lawyers have been given guilty by the CCP for their involvement in human rights cases, such as Gao Zhisheng 律师, Gao Zhisheng lawyer, Li Heping, Wang Quanzhang, Xie Yang, Jiang Tianyong, Ding Jiaxi, Chang Weiping, Shui Muqing, and so on, and so on. And lawyer Wang Yi, who won a Woman of Courage Award from the US government. All of these arrested lawyers have been tortured and reported in insulting ways by the CCP's media. The CCP also humiliates lawyers by attributing shameful charges, such as visiting prostitutes. The CCP government will force political prisoners to confess guilt or performance on TV, such as to say, I have not been tortured. And the CCP government is legally handling the case. If you understand this, you can know that the recent Chinese tennis player Peng Shuai's performance on the internet, including the call with the chairman of the Olympic Committee, is a forced performance. In persecuting lawyers, the CCP controls the lawyers themselves by holding family members, especially children, as hostages, a tactic that has become common since 2015, with almost all persecuted lawyers and their families barred from leaving the country or even their children going to school. In my own case, in May 2017, my whole family were arrested and the police held the barrel of a pistol to the heads of my 2 boys. The older one is 6 years old. The younger one is 2 years old. Then, for more than 2 years, the Beijing police put my home under 24-hour surveillance. The police told me in no uncertain terms that my children were their hostages. Individual lawyers such as Gao Zhisheng and Jiang Tianyong have been jailed for long periods or even disappeared. I can't cover all the ways in which the CCP persecutes lawyers because the CCP controls everything in China and has unlimited power. There are countless ways in which they can persecute lawyers. Finally, I wanted to explain that anti-human rights, anti-rule of law, and anti-constitutionalism are the essence of the CCP. So we should never trust the CCP. The CCP not only does this in China, it also applies this persecution of human rights to other countries, such as incidents that just happened in Britain, where Hong Kongers were beaten by Chinese from China. And this kind of things often happen in America. Many people were threatened and even beaten. The CCP is exporting the CCP's dictatorship model to the world. The CCP's dictatorship is a huge threat to world peace and freedom. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Zhang. Really appreciate. Well, our final panel, I want to maybe call my panelists, Olivia, Enos, and Zubaira, if you can kindly come up to the stage before I call Ren Riting to come to do a short testimony about the persecution against the early Ren Covenant Church. Where's Ren Riting? Yes, please come up. I also want to recognize Juar, who is the daughter of Professor Ili Hamu. Ili Hamu 的女儿 Juar is also here. Professor Ili Hamu has been serving, life in prison for what? Well, really being an ethnic Uyghur. And this year we rescued a family, a Kazakh family, Guzira, who served more than 2 years in the concentration camp and being treated in the most horrible way. I witnessed the government organized systematic prostitution inside the concentration camps. So we thank you for your courage, Juar, for your continue to speak up for religious freedom for all in China. So Riting, please come up.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Riting Ren, a member of the Other Ren Covenant Church. 3 years ago in December, the Other Ren Covenant Church was subjected to a shocking persecution from the Chinese government. The Chengdu police worked in the same time to arrest the church's pastor, elders, and workers. Hundreds of church members were also summoned by the police and asked to leave the church and join to government-supported churches. Several families, including my family, were guarded by government workers in their homes and told by the police when they went out, with the purpose of not allowing members to meet alone with each other. If they were found to be gathering with other members, whether it was for private matters or for faith, they could be summoned and detained by the police for illegal gathering. In 2012, I was baptized as a member of this church, and in 2017 I became a full-time seminarian at the church, attending workers' meeting on every Tuesday. I know very well about this church, so that I know that this church is never a cult, and that all the activities of the church are based on faith. The church is also not a business place, and Pastor Wang Yi never talked about political issues in the church. Therefore, the Chinese government's accusation against the church and all its members are entirely fabricated. The government's charge of subversion, state power, and illegal business operation against Pastor Wang Yi only to cover up the government's ban on religion freedom. After the Lutheran church case, house churches were hit all over China. Elder Chen, who was arrested with Wang Yi, was charged with operating an illegal business. Xiamen Xunsiding Church was banned from worship and faced a large fine. And some elder from other church was also charged with fraud. Some of them I just mentioned were my classmates in seminary. The worker Zhang was discussing a book with me a few days ago, but a couple days later I heard that he had been detained. After I heard that they had been arrested, many people prayed for them, but unfortunately our prayer list is longer than longer. When I heard of their arrest, I thought not only about them, but also their families, especially the young kids. Pastor Wang Yi's son was under police guard at home for a long time after Pastor Wang was arrested. And for a while, he was even taken to school by the police, and there were also people at school watching him. He was just 13 years old. Sometimes I don't worry too much about the people inside in prison because they are mature Christians who will be comforted through the prayer. I worry about their families, especially their kids. I heard that Pastor Wang Yi met with his wife for the first time in the 3 years he has been in prison. It is good, but it's not enough. We must emphasize that he and all the other arrested Christians who are innocent deserve to release immediately. The members of the Lutheran Church are still unable to gather together to worship God. I still feel afraid when I think about the days when I was guarded at home, and now the Christians in China are living an even worse life. I cannot help them or not, but I know I cannot be silent. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ritin. Well, we have heard a lot about, of course, the kind of rule of lawlessness under Xi Jinping. And so this panel, we want to particularly focus on the deteriorating situation on religious freedom. And I think without exaggeration, in the past few years, we have seen the religious persecution has really become the worst. I think some said from the beginning, some said from the end of Cultural Revolution. Today we have two really distinguished panelists who are real experts and also practitioners in advancing religious freedom for all globally and particularly in China and East Turkestan. To my left is my good friend and also colleague at Heritage Foundation, Olivia Enos. So she's a senior policy analyst at the Asian Studies Center on National Security at the Heritage Foundation. So she focuses on human rights, on national security challenges in Asia. And so we're so glad. Welcome, Olivia. To my right is Zubira, also actually one of our judging committees of Lin Zhao Freedom Award. Zubira is currently the Chinese outreach coordinator at the Uyghur Human Rights Project, also a partner with ChinaAid. And welcome, ladies. I guess I think we are not having a lot of time, but let's come right on the topic. You know, one of the tactics of the Chinese Communist Party is in their international propaganda is to try every way to divide, you know, different religions, ethnicities, you know, Han versus Uyghurs or you know, Kazakhs versus Uyghurs, and try to really divide them among ethnicity, among religion. What's the best way for us to address that, you know, in our fight to advancing religious freedom? I come to you, Zubira, first.
Thank you, Bob, for giving me this opportunity to...
Sir.
Okay. Hello? Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone. I mean, we kind of came towards the end of the event. I'm sure, I don't think anyone can take any heavy topic, I guess. But to me, what we're going to discuss is going to be kind of really interesting and important. And first of all, I wish to thank Bob for inviting me and being part of this very important discussion. I think the most the Chinese government afraid of is the most important thing that the Chinese government really afraid is the unification of every ethnic group, religious groups, and just everyone, just every human being. As you know, right now, I am is part of the group that facing genocide by the Chinese government, which is that tells a lot. It's not something simple. Everybody understands that. For that, it is very important for us to come together. And what Chinese government wishes is if we can stay as far away as possible, so the Chinese government continue to persecute everybody, not just the Uyghurs, definitely Kazakhs, other Turkic people, Chinese people as well. I mean, today I have heard everyone's plea. To me, it's not something strange or different story, because you just look like you reading our story. You talking about one of the Uyghur story. Detention, torture, imprisonment, disappearance, everything. It's just, we've been talking this tragic story for so many years and for so long. I think for me, it's time to get together and to do something practical for Uyghurs, like people like Zhang. You know, I'm really grateful, Lin Lianshi, that you're here today to talk about what happened to Zhang. And in that kind of, you know, the brave Chinese friends, if you stood up and speak out about the Uyghur issue, that's much more powerful than we speak every day. Because I'm sure that there are many Chinese people are witnessing what's happening to Uyghurs. And I'm sure there are many the people who has truly kind of gone through the exactly same situation that the Uyghurs have been through. Because Chinese government doesn't like any religion, whether you are Christian, or whether you are Falun Gong, or Muslim, just any faith. The Chinese government, they don't like, and they are the most afraid of faithful people. So that's why it is time for us just to support each other, be outspoken like Zhang Haitao, be outspoken like Puji Chang, lawyer Puji Chang, be outspoken like just anyone. I mean, I understand that it's very difficult for Chinese people to speak out in China, because today we heard a lot of persecution, you know, if people stand up and speak out and what faith there will be. But one thing that I really wish and I really hope that, people in this room, people outside of China, I'm sure there are many people like my friend Bob Fu here and many other Chinese friends like Teng Biao. There are many, many friends like yourself who are supporting and speaking out about the Uyghur crisis and the Uyghur genocide. If we all stand up, speak out together, our power will be much more effective and more loud. And that's what I really hope. And I'm so glad that I'm here today with many people like yourself, especially with Chinese groups, different Chinese movement people. And it is very important. And this is not something that what's happening to Uyghurs is just because of it's something that just to happening to us. It may happen to anyone. I remember few friends in here said, the Chinese artist said that in fact the Chinese Communist Party's power is threat to the world and threat to the whole freedom. So whatever happening to us, we can say, I can tell you that it's spreading. So we just basically a experiment grant in East Turkestan, and that's what we have the Uyghurs face. But in order to prevent whatever happening to us to happen to other people, we should stand together and stand firmly and speak out loudly. Thank you.
Yeah, Olivia, thank you. Yeah. So if I heard right, it's a united front. It's a 共产党叫统一战线. But we should have our own united front, but we call it solidarity. But Olivia, your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the preceding panel focused a lot on the rule of law and also how China misuses law. And it brought to mind for me the regulations on religious affairs that went into effect, I want to say February 2018 or 2019. But the primary purpose of those new regulations were to divide. They sought to, the Chinese Communist Party seeks to identify all persons of faith as extremist, principally because they don't align with the Chinese Communist Party's political aims and goals. They're seeking to supplant religious belief, the most closely held beliefs of any individual, with allegiance to the state. That's inherently divisive because it's seeking to replace an individual's identity over one of the most powerful decisions that a person can make. And so I think when you see people like Ambassador Brownback, when you see people like Frank Wolf, like Chris Smith, like Nadine Meienza, coming here and being outspoken, and every single one of us who is here are bearing witness to the atrocities that the Chinese Communist Party is committing, that means we have a responsibility. And I think the work of Ambassador Brownback in particular, by bringing together actors from all across the globe to share best practices on how to safeguard religious freedom, this was incredibly powerful. So that's the first thing. We can raise awareness, and not just raise awareness, but share best practices in order to ensure that people's right to practice their faiths, no matter what faith they are, is protected. The second is to take out the individuals who are responsible for persecuting persons of faith within China. That means applying financial tools of pressure, sanctions. That means targeting those individuals and those entities within China that are carrying out the CCP's goals. And then finally, I think we have an incredible opportunity with the Olympics coming up. Beijing should never have been selected as host. You and I all know this. It's the most prestigious sporting event in the world. But because it will go ahead as planned with Beijing hosting, we have an opportunity to speak out on behalf of believers. And so I think we can do that, and we should be doing that. And there should not be a single day from February 4th to February 20th, when the Olympics are slated to be held, the Chinese Communist Party is not having story after story raised about the serious abuses that they're perpetrating day in and day out.
Thank you, Olivia. Well, I want to take advantage of my rule of moderator to assign some specific tasks. I think since all of us, today here are representing, one or even multiple organizations. If you show your business card, 名片上很多的头衔， right? So I want to really, I think, echo what Olivia just said, how we can do that specifically, especially what Ambassador Brownback just mentioned about the joint effort to call out these Olympic sponsors, advertisers. So each one of you, I mean, we have Pastor Paul Wang, we have Pastor Zhang Qianjin, we have several pastors, you have a congregation, and we have Mr. Benjamin represent 2 democracy organizations from New York, and I mean, everyone. So I would really want you to, if nothing else you have not heard today, you can forget about the salmon lunch, you know, just sign up, you know, to our desk, basically on, you know, your organization. If you really agree, it is time, you know, to take on these advertisers, call them, really for a moment of truth. 所以我就是，如果大家中文。英文还是不是太清楚的话，我就稍微解释一下，说希望我们在座的呢，今天都能够呼应刚才这个布朗贝克大使提出的因为他跟沃尔夫议员刚才是正式向全球这个组织们都发出一个呼吁就是希望我们向奥林匹克的赞助商、广告商。去就是向他们直接拷问他们的良心让他们就说向中国政府提出来，就说除非你释放这些良心犯，关闭新疆的集中营，否则的话就要撤出中国学习这个 WTA 这个榜样clear? Okay, this is a specific task, okay?
Bob, may I add 3 sort of action items?
Yes, that's good. That's my next item. So, action items. Okay, the next one.
I have many action items, but Olympic-specific action items. The diplomatic boycott was a first step, and honestly, it was a bare minimum. It was almost a last-ditch effort because the Biden administration, frankly, didn't have any other option because it kicked the can down the road so long to clarify what the U.S. position was on U.S. government participation in the Olympics. But I think that, you know, the government has now made its decision, should be commended for it. But I think there are 3 particular actions that can be taken by civil society that are very helpful. First off, throughout all of Olympics history, we've seen athletes boycott or protest in various different ways, whether that was raising the fist over the South African apartheid or the refusal by the U.S. government or by U.S. Participants to dip the flag at opening ceremonies for the London Games. Could you imagine if every single government refused to dip their flag at the opening ceremonies of the Olympics, the message that would send about the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party? These are just some examples for athletes. The second is journalists. Any journalists that are out there need to be covering every single day the stories that we heard today here. They have plenty of people who are willing to speak to the media, and we need to make it clear as advocacy organizations who those people are and make it as easy as possible for journalists to be able to access them so that we can cover their stories and make your voices heard. The third, of course, and I was really excited to hear about Ambassador Brownback's push on the business community. I knew that as soon as there was a clear position from the US, all of us in civil society would be mobilized to pressure the business community as our next line of defense. This is the right move. Advertisers, sponsors need to be thinking about what their role plays. At root, the Olympics is a money-making venture for the host country. China should not be profiting as it is carrying out ongoing genocide and crimes against humanity against Uyghurs. And the NBC has a choice about whether or not it will air the opening ceremonies of the Olympics. They should choose not to, because the 2008 Olympics were a propaganda venture for the CCP, and it's certainly going to be so again. So those are just a couple of ideas, and also loved Ambassador Brownback's idea. It's so great to hear that there's already a coalition forming to pressure a lot of those companies.
Great ideas. Thank you. Yeah.
Just one addition. As you know, both of you said, and also last panelists spoke at already. There are so many groups that you can also contribute in. Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act passed from the US Congress. So that's very important as well. This also kind of your contribution in the Chinese government's enslaving Uyghurs in the concentration camps and elsewhere. Because many detainees in the concentration camps, not only just to face torture or just to, brainwashing or other method of, disappearance, they also, many detainees transferred from East Turkestan to mainland China to use as a slavery, cheap labor in the Chinese factories. And also, the products are now exporting everywhere. So if that law passes, you are kind of preventing the Uyghurs to be slaved in the 21st century. This is very important action as well, if you can support.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I think, I wish we have more time kind of to have more specific creative ideas. I'm sure even in the audience, I think before Logan comes up, I think I have one thing I really feel we feel to mention sufficiently today. That is the situation in Hong Kong, right? I think when the students protest, the whole world were watching. And now, as the Chinese Communist Party start prosecuting, imprisoning, tons of these prisoners, and something also needs to be done. I want to call out Elmer Yuan. Elmer, do we have a mic outside there? Can you give us a few thoughts, just to be brief? And Elmer, just to give a quick
thank you, Bob.
introduction for yourself.
A few quick words. I know we are running over time already, so I don't want to.
We have to pay a fine,
time.
but I said we would rather pay a fine than not having our speakers speak.
Thank you again, Bob. We've been hearing meeting after meeting all the sufferings, all the complaints, all the pain, and all the crimes the communists have done. I think we need to put aside some of our resource, making some aggressive move instead of defensive move. And I'm a businessman. Sorry. For instance, I'm very good here talking about asking the advertisers not to advertise. But more effectively, ask the consumer not to buy. If you advertise, we don't buy. This is going to hurt them. You are telling them to do the right thing, which is fine, but few people listen to that. They are looking after the money. I'm a businessman. Money is the target. If we don't buy their product, you advertise, this is what we did in Hong Kong. You talk for the communists, we don't buy from you. So half of those companies in Hong Kong went bankrupt. Seriously, I'm talking about Maxim, the biggest catering company in Hong Kong, because one of their owner is the CPPCC, a member, and they went to the UN or somewhere talking for the communists. So as a result, we boycott that chain altogether. And Maxim is the biggest catering company in the whole Asia, and they are right now in big trouble. This is the kind of aggressive attitude. And instead of, we are in pain. There's no question. And I'm not selling short, and these are great people. But we must stop it. We must find a way not just to cry, but to stop this thing. We must designate the Communist Party as a criminal organization, legally, using legislation, not just talking. And if one or two countries started that, and US will follow. It's no question. Everything you said boils down to one point. It's a criminal organization. And if we do not designate that, every time it's like a gangster every day robbing you. And you keep on complaining, and you forgot about yesterday. You only get, I get robbed again. Oh, I get robbed again. Now you cry, and everybody cry. What is the point? What is the point? Your resource is very valuable. Go to lobby all the different parliaments in the world, designate them as a transnational criminal organization. And every CCP member is a conspirator, is a criminal. That's what we have to do. You should not allow them to come into the United States or get out of China altogether. No country should let them into their give them a visa to come in. They should be kicked out of this country altogether. Same thing with Taiwan. I don't understand why Taiwan, communism is legal. It used to be illegal, all right?
Yeah.
And now suddenly it becomes legal after Chen Shui-bian. It's unbelievable. And if we keep on crying every day and keep on crying, there will be no results.
Yeah.
The only result is we have to criminalize them. And then Hong Kong, I'm working my ass off to try to, the sovereignty of Hong Kong does not belong to the China. It belongs to the people of Hong Kong, right?
Yes.
And that's what we have to do. We have to go to different
right.
parliaments in the world and ask them to designate, to pass a resolution that Hong Kong's sovereignty does not belong to the Communist China. And same thing with Taiwan. They still think China is a legitimate country. How the hell can it be legitimate if they don't have voting? How could you have a legitimate government if there's no voting? Am I talking too much?
We need to work, really, harder.
Sorry.
But thank you, Elmer. We really applaud your courage. And I think, that's, I think we'll conclude our second panel and almost the day. Sorry for torturing you guys. And, but I think we all need to, as Elmer and Olivia and Zubira just said, we all need to work together in order to delegitimize this regime and free the people of China, East Turkestan, Tibetans, and honestly, all over the world right now are being suppressed. So thank you all for your patience. Thanks. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming and for being patient as we went over time. Really, for this event, I just pray that as we go into our next weeks and into our next year, that we remember the names and the stories of the prisoners of conscience, of their families, that with every follow-up email, with every letter, with every meeting that we have, that there's purpose behind it. And I pray that we remember the humanity behind the work that we do. And it's an honor to be able to be here with you. And as ChinaAid's treat, for those who've lasted this long, you may take one of John Sal's poem books off the table on your way out. But thank you again, everyone, for coming.
我们那本曹三乔牧师狱中诗集是中英文对照的。So the book Logan just mentioned is a bilingual one from Pastor Zhang Tao's prison book. Yeah, so it's a ChinaAid Christmas gift to everyone. And if you want to grab two, we may still have some. 所以我们那个如果是送给大家的一个圣诞的礼物曹三乔牧师的诗集谢谢大家。